The moment Officer Dane Mitchell slammed 73-year-old Leonard Hayes against the police cruiser, he had no idea he'd just arrested one of America's most classified intelligence assets, a man whose fingerprints would trigger alarms at the highest levels of the FBI within minutes. What started as racial profiling outside a small-town pharmacy would become the biggest mistake of Mitchell's career, bringing federal helicopters and a reckoning that would shake Pinewood to its core. Stay with me until the end of this incredible story and drop a comment about where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The morning sun cast long shadows across Elm Street as Leonard Hayes stepped out of Morrison's pharmacy, his prescription bag clutched in his weathered hand. At 73, he moved with the deliberate precision that 4 decades of military service had etched into his bones. His silver hair was trimmed to regulation length. Old habits died hard, and his pressed khakis bore crisp lines that would make any drill sergeant proud. "Have a blessed day, Mr. Hayes," called Martha Morrison from behind the counter, her voice carrying through the closing door. Leonard raised his free hand in acknowledgement, a slight smile crossing his face. Martha had been filling his prescriptions for 15 years now, ever since he'd moved to Pinewood after retirement. It was Thursday, his regular pharmacy day, as predictable as the sunrise. He'd pick up his heart medication, grab coffee at Joe's Diner, then head home to tend his garden before the afternoon heat set in. The October air carried a hint of autumn's approach, though in this part of Virginia, the leaves were just beginning their transformation. Leonard paused on the sidewalk, adjusting his Air Force veteran cap, the one with his Chief Master Sergeant insignia that his granddaughter had given him last Christmas. He never wore it to draw attention, but rather as a quiet reminder to himself of who he'd been, what he'd survived, and what he'd protected. That's when he heard the cruiser. The engine's rumble was different from civilian vehicles. Leonard's trained ear caught it immediately. 38 years of service in military intelligence had taught him to notice things others missed. The Crown Victoria pulled alongside him, slowing to match his walking pace. Leonard kept his stride steady, neither speeding up nor slowing down. He'd learned long ago that sudden movements attracted unwanted attention. "Sir, we need to speak with you." The voice came from the passenger window. Deputy Shane Kowalski, barely 25, with the kind of eager expression that suggested he was trying too hard to impress someone. Leonard had seen that look on countless young airmen over the years. "Good morning, officers," Leonard replied, stopping and turning to face the vehicle fully. His tone was neutral, respectful. "How can I help you?" The driver's door opened, and Officer Dane Mitchell emerged. 6'2", built like a linebacker gone slightly to seed, with pale blue eyes that held a coldness Leonard recognized immediately. This wasn't about helping anyone. Mitchell's hand rested casually on his service weapon, not quite threatening, but certainly suggestive. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. "Someone matching your description." Leonard's mind cataloged the accusation with military efficiency. Suspicious activity. Someone matching your description. Translation: black man in a predominantly white neighborhood. "I'm not aware of any suspicious activity, officer," Leonard responded calmly. "I've just come from Morrison's pharmacy. I'm picking up my prescription as I do every Thursday." Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Every Thursday? You come here every Thursday?" "Yes, sir, for the past 15 years. "That's interesting." Mitchell stepped closer, invading Leonard's personal space in a way designed to intimidate. "Because Mrs. Henderson called about someone casing the stores along this street, looking in windows, acting suspicious." Leonard knew Mrs. Henderson, a nervous woman in her 60s who lived 3 blocks over and called the police at least once a month about something or other. Last month it had been a suspicious van, that turned out to belong to a plumber. The month before, a dangerous dog that was actually a service animal. Officer Mitchell. Leonard read the nameplate clearly, making sure the man knew he was being identified. I can assure you I haven't been casing anything. I walked directly from my car to the pharmacy, picked up my prescription, and was heading back to my vehicle. Where's your car? Kowalski had exited the cruiser, now positioning himself slightly behind Leonard, a tactical position that wasn't lost on the veteran. Leonard pointed to the blue Toyota Camry, parked legally in a metered spot 50 feet away. Right there. Meters paid for another 40 minutes. Mitchell followed his gesture, then looked back at Leonard with increased suspicion. That your vehicle... Yes, sir. You have any identification? Leonard reached slowly for his wallet, telegraphing every movement. I'm going to get my wallet from my back pocket. Slowly. Mitchell commanded, his hand tightening on his weapon. Leonard extracted his wallet with deliberate care and handed over his driver's license. Mitchell examined it like he was looking for evidence of forgery. Leonard Hayes, this says you live on Oakwood Drive. That's correct? That's the nice part of town. Leonard said nothing. There was no good response to that observation. How long have you lived there? 15 years. Mitchell handed the license to Kowalski, who jogged back to the cruiser to run it through their system. Leonard knew what they'd find: nothing. Not even a parking ticket. His record was spotless, had been for 7 decades. What's in the bag? Mitchell pointed to the pharmacy bag. My prescription, heart medication. Mind if I take a look? It wasn't really a question. Leonard recognized the trap. Refuse and he'd be labeled uncooperative, probably detained for obstruction. Comply and he'd be surrendering his Fourth Amendment rights. But Leonard Hayes had survived far more dangerous situations than this. He'd been a black man in the Air Force in the 1960s, had operated in hostile territories where the wrong word meant death, not detention. I'd prefer to maintain my privacy, officer. I've committed no crime and you have no probable cause to search my belongings. Mitchell's face flushed slightly. You getting smart with me? No, sir. I'm exercising my constitutional rights. The standoff lasted perhaps 10 seconds, though it felt longer. Other pedestrians had begun to notice some slowing their pace, others pulling out their phones. Leonard spotted Marcus Williams, a young man who worked at the hardware store, clearly recording the interaction. License is clean, Kowalski called out, returning from the cruiser. But there was something in his expression, a slight uncertainty, as he handed Mitchell a piece of paper along with the license. Mitchell glanced at it, and his expression shifted. Says here you're military. Retired Air Force. 38 years of service. What did you do in the Air Force? Various positions. Ended my career as Chief Master Sergeant. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. That's not what I asked. What did you do, Tom? Leonard had answered this question 1,000 times over the years, always with the same carefully crafted response. Administrative duties mostly. Personnel management. It wasn't a lie exactly. He had managed personnel, specifically intelligence assets, across 3 continents during the Cold War. He'd run operations that were still classified, had briefed presidents and generals, had made decisions that affected national security at the highest levels. But all of that was buried under layers of classification that wouldn't be declassified for another 50 years, if ever. Administrative duties, Mitchell repeated skeptically. Right. Step over to the vehicle, Mr. Hayes. Am I being detained? I'm conducting an investigation. Into what crime? Mitchell's jaw tightened. Sir, I'm asking you nicely to step over to the vehicle. Leonard weighed his options. The small crowd growing around them included at least 3 people recording. Sarah Chen from the local newspaper had appeared, her press credentials, visible camera in hand. This was becoming a scene, and scenes had a way of escalating. "Officer, I've answered your questions. I've provided identification. I've broken no laws. I'd like to continue my day." Mitchell moved faster than Leonard expected, grabbing his arm and spinning him toward the cruiser. The prescription bag fell from Leonard's hand, pills scattering across the sidewalk. "Now you're resisting," Mitchell growled. "I'm not resisting," Leonard said, clearly loud enough for the cameras to pick up. "I'm being assaulted." The words triggered something in Mitchell. He slammed Leonard against the hood of the cruiser, pressing his face against the hot metal. Leonard didn't struggle. He'd learned long ago that fighting back only gave them excuse to escalate. "Spread your legs, hands on the hood." Leonard complied, his mind already cataloging everything for the inevitable report. Mitchell's hands were rough as they patted him down, finding nothing but his wallet keys and phone. "He's clean," Mitchell announced, seeming almost disappointed. "Those pills," Kowalski pointed to the scattered medication. "What if they're not really heart medication?" Mitchell's eyes lit up with possibility. "Good thinking. Gather them up. We'll need to verify what they really are." "Those are prescription medications," Leonard stated firmly. "The label clearly shows—" "Labels can be faked," Mitchell interrupted. "We see it all the time. Drug dealers putting illegal substances in prescription bottles." It was absurd, and everyone watching knew it. But Mitchell had crossed a line and now needed justification for his actions. Leonard recognized the psychology. He'd seen it in interrogation rooms in East Berlin, in Cairo, in Moscow. Once someone in authority overreached, they rarely backed down. They doubled down. "Stand up," Mitchell ordered. "Turn around." Leonard straightened slowly, his joints protesting after being pressed against the hood. Mitchell produced handcuffs, the metal gleaming in the morning sun. "You're under arrest for suspicion of possession of controlled substances." "This is a mistake," Leonard said quietly. "Those are legitimate prescriptions. You can call the pharmacy. You have the right to remain silent." Mitchell began the Miranda warning, his voice carrying across the growing crowd. As the cold metal closed around Leonard's wrists, he felt a familiar calm descend. He'd been in worse situations, much worse. In 1982, he'd been captured by Soviet agents in Afghanistan, held for 3 days before a SEAL team extracted him. In 1991, he'd talked his way out of an Iraqi detention center with nothing but forged papers and flawless Arabic. This was different, though. This was happening in his own country, in the town where he'd chosen to spend his retirement, on a sidewalk where he'd walked peacefully for 15 years. "This is bullshit," Marcus Williams called out, still recording. "Mr. Hayes volunteers at the youth center. He's never done anything wrong." "Sir, please step back," Kowalski warned, moving toward the growing crowd. Sarah Chen stepped forward, press credentials prominent. "Officer Mitchell, can you explain what probable cause you have for this arrest?" "No comment. Step back, ma'am." Mitchell guided Leonard toward the cruiser, one hand on the cuffs, the other on Leonard's shoulder. As they moved, Leonard caught sight of his reflection in the store window, a distinguished elderly black man in handcuffs being perp-walked past businesses he'd frequented for years. The humiliation burned, but he kept his expression neutral. He'd learned long ago that dignity couldn't be taken, it could only be surrendered. "Watch your head," Mitchell said perfunctorily as he pushed Leonard into the back seat. The cruiser smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The partition between front and back was scratched plexiglass, and Leonard noted the camera mounted on the dashboard. Everything was being recorded, which was good. Documentation would be crucial. Kowalski gathered the scattered pills, dropping them into an evidence bag with theatrical care. Several bystanders shouted protests, but the deputies ignored them. Mitchell slid into the driver's seat, adjusting his rearview mirror to watch Leonard. "Comfortable back there?" Leonard didn't respond. Anything he said would be used to construct a narrative that justified this arrest. The drive to the sheriff's station took 12 minutes. Leonard counted the turns, noted the route habits from a different life when such details could mean survival. The town he'd called home for 15 years looked different from the back of a police cruiser. The familiar streets seemed foreign, hostile. "You know," Mitchell said conversationally, "I've been doing this job for 18 years. I can always tell when someone's hiding something." Leonard remained silent. "The quiet ones are always the most interesting." "What were you really doing on Elm Street, Mr. Hayes?" "Still nothing." "Administrative duties?" Mitchell chuckled. "Right. I've met plenty of veterans. The real ones are always specific about what they did. It's the fake ones who give vague answers." The accusation of stolen valor was so absurd, Leonard almost laughed. His DD-214 was framed in his home office along with commendations that included a Defense Superior Service Medal, 2 Legions of Merit, and a Bronze Star that he'd earned in a classified operation in Panama that officially never happened. They pulled into the station's garage, away from public view. Mitchell came around to extract Leonard from the vehicle, his movements efficient and practiced. How many times had he done this? How many other innocent people had taken this same walk? The booking area was bright with fluorescent lights that hummed slightly off-key. Deputy Lisa Trent looked up from her desk, her expression shifting from boredom to surprise when she saw Leonard. "Mr. Hayes." She knew him from the library fundraiser last spring. "What? Suspicion of possession," Mitchell announced brusquely. "Need to process him." Trent's confusion was evident, but she began the paperwork. Leonard was positioned against a height chart photographed from multiple angles. Front, left, right. The camera flash was harsh, unforgiving. "Fingers here," Trent instructed, her voice apologetic, as she guided Leonard's hands to the digital scanner. This was the moment Leonard had been expecting. The scanner hummed as it captured his prints, uploading them to the National Crime Information Center database. What happened next would depend on how deep the government had buried his records. The machine beeped. Trent frowned, tried again. Another beep. "System's acting up," she muttered. "Let me try the backup scanner." The backup scanner produced the same result. Error. Unable to process. "What the hell?" Mitchell moved closer, examining the screen. "It's not recognizing the prints," Trent explained. "Like they're not in the system at all." That wasn't quite accurate. Leonard's prints were in the system, just not in any database these local officers could access. They existed in a classified server at Langley, protected by encryption, that would take longer than the universe's lifetime to crack. "Run them manually," Mitchell ordered. As Trent worked, Leonard was subjected to the rest of the booking process. "Empty your pockets, already done. Remove your belt shoelaces. Stand here. Sit there." Each instruction delivered with the casual indifference of routine. Sheriff Tom Daniels appeared in the doorway, a big man with the look of a former Marine. His eyes found Leonard, and his expression tightened. "Mitchell, a word." The 2 men stepped aside, their voices lowered, but not enough. Leonard's trained ear caught fragments. "Prominent citizen. Suspicious behavior. Pills could be." "Better be damn sure." When Mitchell returned, his jaw was set with determination. "Put him in holding 3. Holding 3 was separate from the general holding area, a single cell typically used for high-risk detainees or those requiring isolation. Leonard was neither, which meant this was about intimidation. The cell was 8 by 10 feet, containing a metal bench, a toilet with no seat, and a camera in the corner. The walls were painted institutional beige, scarred with the scratches and stains of previous occupants. Leonard sat on the bench and his posture erect, hands folded in his lap. Time passed differently in custody. Without his watch or phone, Leonard tracked it by the shifting quality of light from the small window set high in the wall. An hour, maybe 90 minutes. The pills Mitchell had confiscated were undoubtedly being tested, which would reveal exactly what the label claimed: metoprolol for blood pressure, atorvastatin for cholesterol. Standard medications for a man his age. The door buzzed open. Deputy Trent appeared looking troubled. "Mr. Hayes, would you like to make a phone call?" "Thank you, yes." She led him to a phone bolted to the wall in the booking area. Leonard dialed from memory, not his lawyer, not his family, but a number he'd been instructed to memorize years ago for emergencies. It rang twice. "Verification services," a neutral voice answered. "This is Kingfisher 77 Alpha," Leonard said quietly. "Authentication Zulu Bravo 9. There was a pause. "Please verify your situation, Kingfisher." "Local detention, Pinewood, Virginia Sheriff's Department. Fingerprint scan has likely triggered alerts." "Understood. Maintain current position. Assets are being mobilized." The line went dead. Trent looked at him curiously, but said nothing as she escorted him back to the cell. What Leonard didn't know, couldn't know from his isolation, was that his fingerprint scan had indeed triggered alerts. Not just any alerts, but priority flags at the National Security Agency, the CIA, and the FBI simultaneously. His prints were tagged with a classification level that required presidential authority to fully access. The error message at the sheriff's station was actually the system's way of protecting information it wasn't cleared to display. At FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., Director Elaine Morris was in a budget meeting when her assistant burst in, face pale. "Ma'am, we have a Kingfisher alert." Morris stood so abruptly, her chair rolled backward. "Which one?" 77 Alpha, ma'am. He's being held by local law enforcement in Virginia." "Christ." Morris turned to the room of confused executives. "Meeting's over. Everyone out. Now." As the room cleared, Morris was already pulling up classified files on her secure terminal. Leonard Hayes, her mentor, the man who'd recruited her into intelligence work 30 years ago, who'd taught her everything about running assets in hostile territory. A man whose real service record was so classified that even she, as FBI director, could only access portions of it. "Get me a helicopter," she barked to her assistant, "and a tactical team. We're going to Pinewood." "Ma'am, should I notify?" "Notify no one. This is need to know only, and right now nobody else needs to know." Back in Holding 3, Leonard heard increased activity in the station. Footsteps moving quickly, voices raised in confusion or alarm. He remained still, centered. Whatever was happening, it was beyond his control now. He'd made his call, activated protocols that had been dormant for years. The machine was in motion. Sheriff Daniels appeared at his cell, face flushed. "Mr. Hayes, there seems to be some confusion about your arrest. We're trying to sort it out." "I appreciate that, Sheriff." The pills checked out as legitimate prescriptions, as I indicated they would. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "Officer Mitchell maintains there were other suspicious factors, such as your presence in that area reports of suspicious activity." "Sheriff, I've lived in this town for 15 years. I've volunteered at the youth center, served on the library board, contributed to numerous local charities. What exactly is suspicious about me picking up my prescription?" Daniels couldn't meet his eyes. They both knew the answer. The sound came first, The distinctive thrum of helicopters, multiple helicopters approaching fast. Daniel's radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, we have federal aircraft requesting immediate landing clearance in the parking lot." "Federal what federal? They're identifying as FBI, sir. They're not really requesting. They're informing." Daniels went pale. "How many?" "3 helicopters, sir. Tactical teams deploying now." Through the small window, Leonard could see shadows passing as the helicopters descended. He allowed himself a small smile. Elaine always did like to make an entrance. The station erupted in chaos. Deputies ran past Leonard's cell radios, crackling with overlapping communications. Someone was shouting about jurisdiction, someone else about protocols. And above it all, the steady, authoritative sound of federal agents taking control. The door to the holding area burst open. FBI agents in tactical gear poured in, weapons drawn, but pointed down, their movements precise and coordinated. Behind them, walking with the confidence of absolute authority, came Director Elaine Morris herself. She'd aged well in the 10 years since Leonard had last seen her hair silver now, but her bearing still military straight. Her eyes found him through the cell bars, and something passed between them. Relief, anger, determination. "Open this cell immediately," she commanded. "Ma'am, this is our jurisdiction," Daniels began. Morris turned on him with a look that could have frozen helium. "Sheriff Daniels, the man you're holding, is a federal asset whose classification level is so far above your pay grade that you couldn't see it with the Hubble telescope. You will open this cell, you will release him immediately, and then you and I are going to have a conversation about how this happened. Is that clear?" "Aye. But he was arrested for walking while black." Morris's voice could have cut glass. "Because that's what your own surveillance footage shows." "Oh yes, Sheriff, we've already pulled your files, your cameras, your entire digital footprint for the last 6 hours. A deputy fumbled with keys, hands shaking, as he unlocked Leonard's cell. Leonard stood slowly, his dignity intact despite the circumstances. "Director Morris," he said formally. "Mr. Hayes," her voice softened slightly. "Are you injured?" "No, ma'am." "Good." She turned back to Daniels. "Your Officer Mitchell. Where is he?" He's in the break room." "Not anymore. He's in federal custody pending investigation for violation of civil rights under color of law. Agent Martinez, please collect Officer Mitchell." "You can't just," Daniels sputtered. "I can, I am, and I will," Morris interrupted. "Mr. Hayes here has served this country in ways you cannot imagine. He has presidential commendations that are so classified they don't officially exist. He has saved American lives, including mine, more times than I can count. And your department arrested him for picking up heart medication." The break room door opened, and Mitchell was escorted out in handcuffs, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. He saw Leonard standing free, and his expression shifted to rage. "This is bullshit. He was acting suspicious. We had reports." "Officer Mitchell," Morris said coolly, "you're about to learn what real suspicion looks like. A federal investigation into your arrest records, your conduct, your entire career. We've already found 17 similar arrests in the last 3 years, all targeting black men over 60, all dismissed for lack of evidence. Pattern and practice, Officer Mitchell. That's federal territory." As Mitchell was led away, Leonard stepped forward. "Director, I appreciate the response, but don't." She held up a hand. "We're not done here. Not by a long shot. Sheriff Daniels, I need your conference room. We're going to review every arrest your department has made in the last 5 years. Every complaint, every use of force." "This is a small town," Daniels protested weakly. "With a big problem," Morris finished. Mr. Hayes, would you like to observe? Leonard considered. Part of him wanted to leave to go home and tend his garden and pretend this hadn't happened. But he thought about the young black men in town who didn't have classified service records, who didn't have federal directors ready to deploy helicopters for them. Yes, he said. I would. The conference room filled quickly. Federal agents set up laptops, pulled files, made calls. A strange energy filled the space, the controlled chaos of a federal investigation kicking into high gear. Morris directed traffic with the efficiency Leonard remembered from operations they'd run together in hostile territory. Talk to me about Mitchell, she said to an agent reviewing digital files. 18-year veteran, no formal disciplinary actions. But ma'am, the pattern is clear. 32 arrests of black men over the last 3 years, only 3 resulted in actual charges, none in convictions. Compare that to his arrests of white suspects' 70% conviction rate. Classic, Morris muttered. What about complaints? 14 formal complaints, all dismissed at the department level. No external investigation. Sheriff Daniels stood in the corner watching his department's dirty laundry being aired in real time. Those complaints were investigated by you, Morris pointed out. Investigating your own officers. How convenient. Leonard's phone returned to him, along with his other possessions buzzed with messages. Word had spread through Pinewood like wildfire. The videos from Elm Street were already viral, the arrival of FBI helicopters adding fuel to the social media fire. His granddaughter had called 6 times. He stepped out to return her call, assuring her he was safe. When he returned, Morris was standing at a whiteboard mapping connections. This isn't just Mitchell, she was saying. This is systemic. Look at these arrest patterns, these neighborhoods targeted, these demographics. Sheriff Daniels, your department has been functionally operating as an occupying force in minority communities. That's not we serve and protect everyone, Daniels protested. Your own data says otherwise. She turned to Leonard. Mr. Hayes, how many times have you been stopped by Pinewood police in your 15 years here? Leonard thought. Including today, 14 times. Never ticketed, never charged, just stopped and questioned. 14 times. Morris let that hang in the air. A decorated veteran with no criminal record stopped 14 times. Sheriff, do you know how many times I've been stopped by police in the last 15 years? 0. And I live in D.C. The afternoon wore on. More agents arrived, some from the Civil Rights Division, others from the Public Corruption Unit. The small sheriff's station was overwhelmed with federal presence. Local deputies watched nervously as their files were copied. Their computers mirrored their practices, scrutinized. Mitchell was being interviewed in one room, his union representative having arrived looking harried and overwhelmed. Through the glass, Leonard could see him gesticulating angrily, then slumping in defeat as agents presented evidence. Mr. Hayes, an agent approached him. We'd like to take your formal statement. Leonard nodded, following her to a quiet office. For the next 2 hours, he recounted not just the morning's events, but years of interactions with Pinewood police. Each stop, each questioning, each moment of humiliation, dressed up as routine procedure. Did you ever file a complaint? The agent asked. No. Why not? Leonard considered his words. When you're black in America, especially in a small town, you learn to pick your battles. Filing a complaint makes you a target. I just wanted to live my retirement in peace. And yet you called the verification number today. Being arrested is different from being stopped. And those pills, if they'd claimed they were illegal substances, if they'd charged me with possession, that would have been a felony arrest on my record. That I couldn't let stand. The agent nodded, making notes. Your service record is impressive. What I can see of it anyway. Most of it you can't see. I gathered that. The director seems to hold you in high regard. We worked together many years ago. She was a good agent. She's a better director." As evening approached, the initial chaos settled into organized investigation. The parking lot filled with news vans, reporters drawn by the unprecedented federal response to what had started as a simple arrest. Sarah Chen had published her photos and video, the images of Leonard in handcuffs, juxtaposed with the FBI helicopters creating a powerful narrative. Morris found Leonard standing by a window watching the media circus outside. "We should get you home," she said. "In a moment." "Elaine, this response 3 helicopters, tactical teams, it's excessive for a wrongful arrest." She was quiet for a moment. "You know why I really came myself?" "Tell me." "Because 40 years ago, a young black analyst was told she didn't have what it took for field work. And a chief master sergeant named Leonard Hayes took her under his wing, trained her, believed in her when no one else would. Because that same man ran operations that saved countless lives, including mine in Beirut in '85. Leonard remembered Beirut. The extraction that had gone sideways the 3 days they'd spent hidden in a basement while insurgents hunted them. But mostly, Morris continued, because when I heard Kingfisher 77 Alpha was in custody, I thought about all the Leonard Hayes out there who don't have classified service records, who don't have federal directors ready to rain holy hell on their behalf. This isn't just about you. It's about what you represent, every veteran, every citizen who's been profiled, harassed, humiliated by those sworn to protect them. A knock at the door interrupted them. An agent entered, tablet in hand. "Director, you need to see this. We've been going through Mitchell's personal communications." Morris took the tablet, her expression darkening as she read. She handed it to Leonard. It was a text thread between Mitchell and other officers dated over several months. The language was careful coded, but the meaning was clear. They had been targeting specific neighborhoods, specific demographics, using pretextual stops to assert authority. "This is conspiracy," Morris said. "This is organized violation of civil rights. This isn't one bad apple, this is rot in the barrel." Sheriff Daniels was brought in, shown the evidence. His face went from red to white as he read. "I didn't know," he said weakly. "That's either a lie or incompetence," Morris responded. "Neither is acceptable. Sheriff Daniels, I'm recommending to the Attorney General that this department be placed under federal oversight. Consent decree the works. Your officers will be retrained or replaced. Your practices will be reformed. And you personally will be investigated for negligent supervision." "This will destroy the department," Daniels protested. "No," Leonard spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "This will save it. A department that operates this way is already destroyed. This is rehabilitation." As night fell, Leonard was finally free to go. Morris assigned an agent to drive him home, but he declined. "I'll drive myself. My car is still on Elm Street." "Leonard," Morris said quietly, "what you did today, making that call, it's going to change things here. It shouldn't have taken my classified status to warrant basic civil rights. No, it shouldn't have. But sometimes the system needs a shock to wake up. You were that shock." Outside, the media descended immediately. Cameras, microphones shouted questions. Leonard stood straight, dignified in the glare of lights. "Mr. Hayes, how do you feel about your arrest? Can you comment on the FBI response? What would you say to Officer Mitchell?" Leonard held up a hand, and surprisingly they quieted. "Today I was arrested for the crime of picking up my prescription while black. This isn't new. It happens every day across America. The only difference is that today there were consequences. Today the system was forced to confront its own failures." "Mr. Hayes, are you going to sue?" "I'm going to do something more important. I'm going to work with this community to ensure this never happens again. To any of us. What about Officer Mitchell? Leonard paused, choosing his words carefully. Officer Mitchell is a symptom of a diseased system. Treating the symptom without curing the disease accomplishes nothing. We need systemic change, not just individual accountability. He walked through the crowd, ignoring further questions. His car was where he'd left it, a parking ticket tucked under the windshield, a final insult from the Pinewood Police Department. He removed it, almost laughing at the absurdity. The drive home was surreal. The same streets, the same houses, but everything felt different. At a red light, the car next to him was full of young black men. The driver recognized him, gave him a nod of respect, a raised fist of solidarity. Leonard nodded back. His house was lit up, cars in the driveway. His daughter's SUV, his son-in-law's truck. They'd driven down from Richmond. As he pulled in, the front door burst open. His granddaughter Jasmine ran out, throwing her arms around him before he could fully exit the car. "Grandpa, we saw everything online. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." His daughter Patricia followed, her face a mix of relief and fury. "Dad, what the hell happened?" "Inside," he said. "I'll tell you everything inside." His living room had become a command center. His son-in-law Marcus had multiple laptops open, monitoring social media. The local news was on TV, showing aerial footage of the FBI helicopters at the sheriff's station. "Dad, the whole thing's viral," Patricia said. "The video has 2 million views already." "The FBI director herself came," Marcus added, amazement in his voice. "Dad, who are you?" Leonard sat in his favorite chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 73 years. "I'm someone who served his country. That should have been enough to prevent today from happening. The fact that it wasn't shows how much work we still have to do." Jasmine, a sophomore at Howard University studying criminal justice, sat at his feet. "Tell us about the FBI director. How do you know her?" "We worked together years ago." "Doing what?" Leonard smiled. "Things I still can't talk about. But Elaine Morris is good people. If anyone can clean up this mess, she can." "Will you have to testify?" Patricia asked. "Probably. There will be investigations, hearings, probably a civil suit." "Good," she said fiercely. "Sue them for everything." "It's not about money, Patricia." "Then what's it about?" Leonard looked at his family, 3 generations gathered in his living room because they'd been frightened for him. "It's about Jasmine being able to walk down any street in America without fear. It's about young black men not having to teach their sons how to survive traffic stops. It's about the promise of America finally being kept for all Americans." The doorbell rang. Marcus checked the security camera. "It's neighbors, a lot of them." Leonard went to the door. His front yard was filling with people. Mrs. Chen from next door, the Williams family from across the street, Joe from the diner, Martha from the pharmacy. They'd brought food casseroles, pies, the suburban armor of community support. "Leonard," Martha Morrison said, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. If I'd known they were going to do that when you left my store." "It's not your fault, Martha." "We're with you," Joe announced loudly. "The whole neighborhood. We're going to that town council meeting next week, and we're demanding changes." More people arrived. The young black men from the youth center where Leonard volunteered. The veterans from the VFW post. The library board members. His living room overflowed into the kitchen onto the back deck. Someone had ordered pizzas. Someone else brought drinks. It became an impromptu rally, a gathering of Pinewood's conscience. Stories were shared, other encounters with Officer Mitchell, other moments of bias ignored or excused. The pharmacist's assistant, a young Latino man, described being followed through stores. An elderly Asian woman recounted being repeatedly asked for proof of citizenship despite being born in Virginia. "We need to organize," someone said. "We need oversight," another added. "We need change," Leonard said, and the room quieted. Real change. Not just firing one officer or disciplining one department. We need to reimagine what public safety means in Pinewood. How? The question came from a young mother holding a toddler. By getting involved, city council meetings, police review boards, community policing initiatives. By holding our elected officials accountable. By refusing to accept that this is just the way things are. His phone rang. Director Morris. "Leonard, I wanted to let you know. Mitchell has been formally charged. Federal civil rights violations. He's looking at serious time. And the department, consent decree papers will be filed Monday. Pinewood PD will be under federal oversight for at least 5 years. Sheriff Daniels has agreed to retire." That's a start. It is. Leonard, there's something else. The Attorney General wants to meet with you. She's considering using Pinewood as a model for reform nationwide. Your case, it's going to matter. After the call, Leonard shared the news with the gathering. Cheers erupted, but he held up his hand. This isn't victory. This is the beginning of the work. Change doesn't come from one arrest or one federal intervention. It comes from sustained community action. The crowd gradually dispersed, but not before committees were formed, meetings scheduled, plans made. Pinewood was awakening to its own potential for transformation. Late that night, Leonard sat on his back porch with Patricia and Jasmine. The stars were bright, the October air crisp. "Grandpa," Jasmine asked, "were you scared today?" Leonard considered lying, projecting invulnerability. But his granddaughter deserved truth. "Yes. For a moment when Officer Mitchell slammed me against that car, I was scared. Not of him, but of what he represented. The power to destroy lives with impunity. But you stood up to him. I exercised my rights. There's a difference. Standing up to him would have given him excuse to escalate. I survived by being smarter than his hatred." "That's not fair," Jasmine said angrily. "You shouldn't have to be smarter than their hatred." "No, I shouldn't. But that's the world we live in. The world we're trying to change." Patricia squeezed his hand. "Dad, what you did today, making that call, getting the FBI involved, you know most people can't do that." "I know. That's why I have to use whatever influence I have left. Not for me, but for everyone who can't make that call." "The director called you Kingfisher," Jasmine noted. "What does that mean?" Leonard smiled. "It's an old code name, from a different life." "Will you ever tell us about that life?" "Someday, when more of it's declassified, when the stories won't put people at risk." "Were you like James Bond?" Jasmine asked with a grin. "More like the person who made sure James Bond had the right information at the right time." They sat in comfortable silence, 3 generations, processing a day that had started with routine and ended with revolution. "What happens now?" Patricia asked. "Now we work, we organize, we push for the change we want to see. Today lit a fire. Now we have to tend it, feed it, make sure it spreads light and not just heat. And Mitchell will face justice. But more importantly, the system that created Mitchell will face reform." His phone buzzed with a text. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Hayes, you don't know me, but I'm a police officer in Richmond. I saw what happened today. There are more of us who want change than you might think. Officers who joined to protect and serve everyone. We're with you." Leonard showed the text to his family. See, change is already starting. As midnight approached, Patricia and Marcus prepared the guest rooms to stay overnight. Jasmine hugged her grandfather tightly. I'm proud of you, Grandpa. For what? For being exactly who you've always been. For showing them that dignity can't be arrested. Alone finally, Leonard walked through his house looking at the photographs on the walls. His military service, though the most significant moments, weren't there, couldn't be there. His wife gone 5 years now, who'd stood by him through deployments he couldn't discuss to places he couldn't name. His children grown successful despite the challenges of being black in America. His grandchildren carrying the torch forward. On his desk was the prescription bag from Morrison's pharmacy retrieved from evidence and returned to him. Such a small thing to have triggered such massive consequences. He took his pills, the heart medication that had been called suspicious, the cholesterol medication that had justified his arrest. His phone rang one more time. A blocked number. Mr. Hayes, this is the President. Leonard straightened instinctively. Madam President, I've been briefed on your situation. I wanted to personally apologize for what you experienced today and to thank you for your service, all of it, including what you're about to do for civil rights reform. Thank you, ma'am. Director Morris speaks very highly of you. She says you taught her everything she knows about intelligence work. She's being generous. She's being accurate from what I can see in your file. Mr. Hayes, I'm signing an executive order tomorrow, creating a national commission on police reform. I'd like you to be on it. Leonard closed his eyes. At 73, he'd thought his service was done, but apparently his country had one more mission for him. I'd be honored, Madam President. Good. Someone from my staff will be in touch. And Mr. Hayes, what happened today was unacceptable. We're going to make sure it never happens again. After the call, Leonard stood at his bedroom window, looking out at Pinewood, sleeping peacefully. Somewhere, Officer Mitchell was in federal custody contemplating his choices. Somewhere, Sheriff Daniels was probably drinking, mourning his career. Somewhere, young black men were sleeping a little easier, knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the system could work for them too. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and interviews, investigations and accusations. There would be pushback from those who benefited from the current system resistance, from those who feared change. The work would be hard, the progress incremental. But tonight, Leonard Hayes, Kingfisher, Evan 7 Alpha, Chief Master Sergeant, retired intelligence operative and American citizen, had proven that dignity backed by determination and the occasional federal intervention could triumph over discrimination. The prescription pills sat on his nightstand, innocent medications that had started a revolution. Leonard took them with water, then lay down in his bed in his house in the town that would never be quite the same. Change had come to Pinewood, and from Pinewood maybe change would spread. The last thing he thought before sleep took him was of his wife Patricia's mother and what she would have said about the day's events. About damn time, Leonard. About damn time. The morning after Leonard's arrest dawned gray and humid with storm clouds gathering on the horizon that seemed to mirror the tension building in Pinewood. Leonard woke at 500 hours, as he had every day for the past 50 years, his internal clock immune to retirement or trauma. His body ached from yesterday's rough handling bruises darkening on his arms where Mitchell had grabbed him, but he'd endured far worse in service to his country. Downstairs, Patricia was already awake, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee watching news vans set up on their quiet street. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her expression a mixture of concern and fierce protectiveness that reminded Leonard of her mother. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, pouring himself coffee from the pot she'd made. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that video. You against the police car. Her voice cracked slightly. Dad, when I was growing up, you were invincible. You were the man who went places we couldn't know about, did things we couldn't imagine, and always came home safe. Yesterday, seeing you in handcuffs. I'm still here, Leonard said gently. Still standing. But you shouldn't have had to. Patricia's phone buzzed, interrupting her. She glanced at it, frowning. It's Marcus. He says you need to see what's happening downtown. She pulled up a live stream from the local news. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's station, at least 200 people, maybe more. They held signs, Justice for Leonard Hayes, End Police Racism, Mitchell Must Go. The reporter was interviewing Sarah Chen, whose photographs had gone viral overnight. This isn't just about Mr. Hayes, Sarah was saying into the camera. This is about every person of color in Pinewood who's been stopped without cause, searched without warrant, arrested without justification. Mr. Hayes just happened to be the one with connections that made the system pay attention. The doorbell rang. Leonard found Director Morris on his porch, looking like she hadn't slept at all. Behind her were two other agents, their expressions professionally neutral. Leonard, we need to talk. May we come in? They settled in the living room, Patricia hovering protectively nearby. Morris accepted coffee gratefully, then pulled out a tablet. The investigation expanded overnight. We've found something significant. She turned the tablet toward Leonard. Officer Mitchell wasn't acting alone. There's an entire network not just in Pinewood but across 3 counties. They call themselves the Brotherhood of Order. Leonard studied the screen, seeing chat logs, photographs, connections mapped out, like an intelligence briefing. White supremacists. More subtle than that. They'd say they're about law and order, protecting their communities. But look at the arrest statistics, the areas they target, the people they stop. It's racial profiling dressed up as police work. How many officers? At least 40 that we've identified so far. Mitchell was middle management. The real leadership goes higher. Morris pulled up another file. Sheriff Daniels may not have known about the Brotherhood specifically, but he created the environment that let them flourish. Ignored complaints, dismissed oversight, promoted based on arrests rather than community policing. So yesterday wasn't random, Patricia interjected. They targeted my father. Morris shook her head. Actually, that's the irony. Mitchell had no idea who Leonard really was. To him, your father was just another elderly black man to harass. The fact that he accidentally kicked a hornet's nest of federal protection was pure chance. The phone rang. Leonard's lawyer, James Crawford, a fellow veteran he'd known for 20 years. Leonard, you sitting down, the DOJ wants to fast-track this. They're treating your case as the tip of the iceberg for a massive civil rights investigation. We're talking RICO charges, conspiracy, the works. You're going to be the star witness in what could be the biggest police corruption case since Rampart. I just wanted to pick up my prescription, James. Well, now you're going to help remake American policing. The Attorney General herself wants to meet with you tomorrow. Can you be in D.C.? After Leonard agreed and hung up, Morris stood to leave. There's something else. Mitchell made bail this morning. He's suspended pending investigation, but he's out there. We have agents watching him, but I wanted you to know. Is Grandpa in danger? Jasmine asked from the doorway. She'd woken up and come downstairs, still in her Howard University sweatshirt. No, Morris assured her. Mitchell's not that stupid. Any move against your grandfather would end his chance at a plea deal and guarantee federal prison. But we're keeping surveillance on him anyway. After Morris left, the family gathered around the kitchen table. The storm that had been threatening finally broke, rain lashing against the windows. Leonard's phone hadn't stopped buzzing interview requests from CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post, even international outlets. "You could use this platform," Jasmine suggested. "Tell the world what really happens in towns like Pinewood." Before Leonard could respond, there was a commotion outside. Through the rain-streaked window, they could see a pickup truck had pulled up. Officer Mitchell climbed out, standing in Leonard's driveway in civilian clothes, rain plastering his hair to his head. "Stay inside," Leonard commanded, but Patricia was already calling 911. Mitchell wasn't approaching the house. He just stood there, staring at it, rain running down his face. Leonard stepped onto the covered porch. "Officer Mitchell, you're violating the restraining order." Mitchell laughed bitterly. "Restraining order? Federal investigation. My life is over because I did my job. Your job was to protect and serve, not harass and intimidate. I protected this town, I kept order. And you..." Mitchell's face twisted with rage. "You destroyed everything with one phone call. Who the hell are you? I'm a citizen whose rights you violated." "Bullshit. Citizens don't get FBI directors flying in on helicopters. Citizens don't get the president calling them." Mitchell stepped closer still in the rain. "I looked you up. Your record's sanitized. 38 years of service, but no specifics. What were you, CIA, NSA? I was an American serving my country just like I thought you were." The sound of sirens grew closer. Mitchell heard them too, his expression shifting from anger to desperation. "They want to make an example of me. 20 years to life, my lawyer says, for doing what every cop in America does every day." "No," Leonard said firmly. "For doing what bad cops do when they think no one's watching. For betraying your oath to treat all citizens equally." Police cars screeched to a halt. Federal agents emerged alongside local officers, weapons drawn. "Dane Mitchell, step away from the property," an agent shouted. Mitchell looked at Leonard one more time. "You think you've won, you think this changes anything. There are thousands like me, millions who support us. This isn't over." He turned, hands raised, and was taken into custody for violating the restraining order. As the cars drove away, Leonard remained on the porch, Patricia and Jasmine joining him. "He's right about one thing," Leonard said quietly. "This isn't over. It's just beginning." The next morning, Leonard dressed in his best suit for the trip to Washington. Patricia insisted on driving him, with Jasmine coming along for what she called living history. The 3-hour drive was mostly silent, each lost in thought, about how a routine Thursday had exploded into a national incident. The Department of Justice building was intimidating by design, a massive Art Deco structure that projected federal power. They were escorted through security and up to a conference room, where Attorney General Rebecca Martinez waited with a team of prosecutors. "Mr. Hayes," Martinez stood extending her hand. "I've read your file, what I'm cleared to read anyway. Your country owes you a debt, and I'm sorry it's taking a wrongful arrest to begin repaying it." The meeting was intensive. They showed Leonard evidence of the Brotherhood of Order's activities training videos, where officers practiced pretextual stops, chat logs, celebrating successful harassments, statistics showing coordinated targeting of minority neighborhoods. "We need your testimony," Martinez explained. "Not just about your arrest, but about the pattern of harassment you've experienced. You're the perfect witness. Unimpeachable background, clear documentation, and the ability to articulate the daily reality of racial profiling. And if I testify, we can break this network, not just in Pinewood, but across Virginia, maybe nationally. Your case gives us the hook to investigate every department where these officers have connections." Leonard thought about the young black men at the youth center, about Jasmine's future children, about all the Leonard Hayes who didn't have classified service records. "I'll do it," The rest of the day was spent with prosecutors going through evidence, preparing testimony. Jasmine took notes furiously, her criminal justice studies coming alive in real time. Patricia watched with a lawyer's eye. She was a corporate attorney, but she understood the legal machinery being set in motion. That evening, they had dinner at a small restaurant near the Capitol. Other diners recognized Leonard from the news, some nodding in support, others looking away uncomfortably. A young black waiter slipped them a note with their check. "Thank you for standing up. My brother was arrested by Mitchell last year. Charges dropped, but the record still follows him." The drive home was through darkness and rain. Patricia's phone rang constantly. Reporters had gotten the number somehow. Leonard's own phone showed missed calls from people he hadn't heard from in years, fellow veterans, old colleagues, whose names he couldn't mention, all expressing support. Back in Pinewood, they found the house surrounded not by reporters but by neighbors standing guard. Joe from the diner, the Williams family, Martha from the pharmacy, dozens of others standing in the rain, with umbrellas protecting Leonard's property from any potential retaliation. "We've been here all day," Joe explained. "Taking shifts. Nobody's getting near your house without going through us." Leonard was moved beyond words. These people, many of whom had never experienced police harassment themselves, understood that an injury to one was an injury to all. Inside, exhausted, the family gathered in the living room. The news was playing footage from the DOJ Martinez, announcing the expansion of the investigation. "The arrest of Leonard Hayes has exposed a cancer in American law enforcement," Martinez was saying. "We will cut it out, no matter how deep we have to go." The phone rang. It was an unknown number, but Leonard answered anyway. "Mr. Hayes, this is Officer Janet Thompson, Pinewood PD. I'm not supposed to be calling you, but I needed you to know not all of us are like Mitchell. Some of us became cops to actually help people. We're testifying, too, about what we've seen, what we've been pressured to do or ignore." "That takes courage, Officer Thompson." "Not as much as what you're doing, sir. You could have made your phone call, gotten released quietly, let it all blow over. Instead, you're fighting for all of us." After she hung up, Leonard sat in his study looking at his service photos. In one, he stood with his unit in Vietnam, young men of all colors serving together. In another, from the Cold War, faces blurred for security, but the memory clear, an operation in East Germany that had prevented a potential nuclear incident. Patricia knocked, entering with tea. "Can't sleep. Thinking about duty. I spent my life protecting America from external threats. Never thought I'd be fighting the same battle at home." "Maybe it's the same battle, Dad. Fighting for what America should be, not what it sometimes is." The next weeks blurred together. Depositions, interviews, strategy sessions. The Brotherhood of Order unraveled as officers flipped, seeking plea deals. Sheriff Daniels resigned in disgrace when emails surfaced, showing he'd known about and ignored systematic discrimination. 43 officers across 3 states were indicted. Leonard became the face of the movement, despite his attempts to stay in the background. His military bearing, his dignity, his refusal to show anger, even when justified, it all made him the perfect spokesman for reform. News programs, congressional hearings, town halls, he attended them all, always with the same message: accountability, reform, justice. The threatening calls started in the 3rd week. Nothing specific enough for action, just voices suggesting he should be careful, that veterans could have accidents, that Pinewood was a small town where things could happen. The FBI traced the calls to Brotherhood sympathizers, but proving criminal intent was difficult. Leonard refused to be intimidated. He continued his routine pharmacy on Thursdays, coffee at Joe's, volunteering at the youth center. But now he was never alone. Federal protection was subtle but constant, and the community had formed its own protective network. One evening at the youth center, a young man named Deshawn approached him. 17, headed for college, one of the kids Leonard had been mentoring for years. "Mr. Hayes, my mom wants to know if you're really okay. She says you look tired on TV." Leonard smiled. "Tell your mom I'm fine. Tired but fine. She also said to tell you that what you're doing matters. My older brother, before you moved here, he got arrested 4 times just walking home from school. Mitchell was one of the officers. Nobody would listen to us then. And now everybody's listening. Because of you. Not just me, Deshawn. Because of everyone who's standing up, speaking out. Change doesn't come from one person. It comes from communities deciding they've had enough." The trial date was set for spring. Mitchell's lawyers were pushing for a plea deal, but federal prosecutors wanted to make an example. The Brotherhood of Order had become a national scandal, with investigations spreading to 12 states. The thin blue line had become a noose around the neck of corrupt departments. One night, Leonard was working late in his study when he heard glass break. He moved quickly, but calmly, to his safe, retrieving the Colt .45 he'd carried in Vietnam. The house alarm was blaring, Patricia and Marcus rushing from the guest room. "Stay back," Leonard commanded, moving through the house with practiced precision. The brick had come through the living room window, a note attached, "Traitor to your race." Leonard almost laughed. He'd been called that before from different perspectives. In the 60s, some black radicals had called him that for serving in the military. Now white supremacists were using the same slur. The FBI response was immediate. Apparently, the protection detail had seen the thrower and was in pursuit. Within an hour, a 22-year-old Brotherhood sympathizer was in custody. Another charge to add to the growing list. "We should move," Patricia suggested as they cleaned up the glass. "Just until the trial's over." "No," Leonard said firmly. "This is my home. I've faced down Soviet agents, Iraqi soldiers, terrorists of every stripe. I'm not running from cowards who throw bricks in the night." The president called the next day, expressing concern and support. The Secret Service offered to take over protection duties. The governor of Virginia issued a statement condemning the attack. The brick thrower had accidentally turned Leonard from a symbol into a martyr for the cause. Support poured in from unexpected places. Veterans organizations that had been silent on police reform suddenly spoke up. Conservative politicians who couldn't ignore a decorated serviceman being attacked in his home called for law and order, real law and order, that protected all citizens. 3 days before the trial was to begin, Leonard received an unexpected visitor. An elderly white man, walking with a cane, standing on his porch in a Marine Corps cap. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Tom Mitchell, Dane's father." Leonard's hand moved instinctively to his phone, ready to call for protection, but the old man raised a weathered hand. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to apologize." They sat on the porch, 2 old veterans on opposite sides of a divide. "I raised that boy," Tom Mitchell said, voice rough with emotion. "Taught him to respect authority, serve his community. Somewhere I failed. He learned the service part but missed the all in all citizens. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been watching you on the news. You served in Nam. I did. Me too. 68 to 70. 1st Marines. We fought alongside black Marines, depended on them, bled with them. Came home and forgot those lessons, let the old prejudices creep back in. That's on me. What Dane became, that's on me too. Your son made his own choices. Maybe. But I never corrected him when he'd make comments. Never challenged him when he'd complain about those people. I was silent, and silence is complicity." Tom struggled to his feet. "I'm testifying, for the prosecution, about the things I heard Dane say, the attitudes in our family, the whole toxic culture that created him." "That's brave of you." Tom Mitchell laughed bitterly. No brave is what you're doing. I'm just trying to salvage something from the wreckage of my family's honor." After he left, Leonard sat alone thinking about fathers and sons, about the prejudices passed down like heirlooms, about the courage it took to break those chains. The trial began on a Monday morning that felt more like summer than spring. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters on both sides, those supporting police reform and those defending the thin blue line. Leonard walked through them all, head high, flanked by federal marshals and Patricia. Inside the courtroom, Mitchell sat at the defense table looking smaller, somehow diminished. His Brotherhood contacts had abandoned him. His fellow officers had turned state's evidence. His department had disowned him. He was alone except for his lawyer and his father, who sat in the gallery looking broken. The prosecutor, Janet Kim, was a small woman with a voice that could fill a courtroom. Her opening statement was devastating, laying out not just Mitchell's crimes, but the entire culture that enabled them. "This isn't about one bad apple," she concluded. "This is about an orchard poisoned at the roots, producing fruit that looks like law enforcement, but tastes like oppression." The defense tried to paint Mitchell as a good cop, doing a difficult job, making a single mistake in a distinguished career. But the evidence was overwhelming: videos, recordings, documents, testimony from fellow officers who'd finally found the courage to speak. When Leonard took the stand, the courtroom was silent. He testified for 3 hours, not just about his arrest, but about the accumulated weight of harassment, the 1,000 small cuts that bled dignity. "Officer Mitchell asked me what I did in the Air Force," Leonard said, looking directly at the defendant. "I told him administrative duties. That was true, but incomplete. What I did was protect America from those who would destroy it from without. I never imagined I'd need to protect it from those sworn to serve it from within." The defense attorney, a sharp woman named Linda Stevenson, tried to shake him on cross-examination. "Mr. Hayes, isn't it true that you used classified government connections to avoid normal legal procedures?" "No. I used emergency protocols available to any federal asset in danger." "But normal citizens don't have those protocols, do they?" "No," Leonard agreed. "Which is precisely the problem. Every citizen should be protected from false arrest, not just those with classified service records. You're asking this jury to believe that Officer Mitchell arrested you solely because of your race." Leonard was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "I'm asking this jury to look at the evidence. 43 arrests of black men over 60, in 3 years, 3 convictions. Either Officer Mitchell is the worst judge of criminal behavior in law enforcement history, or he was using race as a proxy for suspicion. The statistics speak for themselves." The trial lasted 2 weeks. Witness after witness testified about Mitchell's patterns, the Brotherhood's activities, the department's willful blindness. Officer Thompson took the stand describing the pressure to make arrests in certain neighborhoods, the unofficial quotas that targeted minorities. Tom Mitchell's testimony was perhaps the most damaging. The old Marine spoke about his son's increasingly radical views, the casual racism at family dinners, the Brotherhood materials he'd found in Dane's old room. "I raised a son who became what I fought against in the war," he said, tears running down his weathered face. "Enemy of freedom, just wearing a different uniform." The verdict came back in 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Federal civil rights violations, conspiracy, deprivation of rights, under color of law. Mitchell would serve a minimum of 15 years, possibly 25. As the verdict was read, Mitchell turned to look at Leonard. There was no apology in his eyes, just a cold hatred that promised this wasn't over, that there would always be more Mitchells, more Brotherhoods, more battles to fight. Outside the courthouse, the media waited. Leonard stood at the microphones, Patricia beside him, Jasmine and Marcus behind them. Justice was served today, he began. But justice for one is not justice for all. Officer Mitchell was convicted, but the system that created him remains. The work continues. Mr. Hayes, a reporter called out, "What's next for you?" "I'm going home. I'm going to tend my garden, take my medication without fear, and continue serving my community. But I'm also joining the National Police Reform Commission. The arrest was the beginning. The trial was the middle. The real work of reform is the end that's really another beginning." That evening back in Pinewood, the community gathered in the park for what was called a unity rally, but felt more like a celebration. Black and white, young and old, all united in the belief that their town could be better. Leonard was asked to speak. He stood at the podium looking out at faces he'd known for 15 years, and faces he was seeing for the first time. "Pinewood has a choice," he said. "We can be the town that was exposed as harboring systematic racism, or we can be the town that confronted its demons and chose transformation. I know which Pinewood I want to live in." The new sheriff, Angela Rodriguez, the first woman and first person of color to hold the position, took the microphone next. "Mr. Hayes showed us what courage looks like. Now it's our turn. Every officer in this department will undergo civil rights training. We're establishing a civilian review board with real power. We're implementing body cameras and accountability measures. Pinewood PD will become a model for what community policing should be." As the rally continued into the evening, Leonard found himself sitting on a bench with Joe from the diner. "Hell of a thing, Leonard. From picking up pills to changing the country." "I didn't change anything, Joe. I just lifted a rock. What crawled out was always there. The change comes from people deciding they won't put the rock back down." "Still not bad for a retired administrative clerk," Joe said with a knowing wink. Leonard smiled. His cover story had held for 15 years, would probably hold forever. The young analyst he'd recruited in Berlin in '82, now deputy director of the CIA, had called to congratulate him carefully on an unsecured line maintaining the fiction. The operations he'd run, the agents he'd handled, the intelligence he'd gathered, all of it would remain classified long after he was gone. But this, what he'd done here in Pinewood, this would be his public legacy. Not the wars fought in shadow, but the battle waged in daylight for the soul of American justice. As the celebration continued around him, Leonard thought about his wife, dead 5 years now. She'd always said his greatest service would come after his service ended. As usual, she'd been right. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but the code word at the end identified it as from one of his old assets now high in federal law enforcement. "Kingfisher Brotherhood cells identified in 17 states. Your testimony is the key to unlocking federal prosecution. The war you started in Pinewood is going national. Stand ready." Leonard deleted the text as protocol demanded, but the message remained. At 73, when most men his age were fully retired, he'd begun perhaps his most important mission. Not protecting America from foreign enemies, but protecting Americans from domestic ones who wore badges and betrayed oaths. The storm that had threatened that morning after his arrest had passed, but Leonard knew more storms were coming. The Brotherhood wouldn't go quietly. Mitchell had supporters, sympathizers, fellow travelers who saw Leonard as a race traitor, a tool of the deep state, an enemy of law and order. But Leonard Hayes had faced storms before, had weathered them in Vietnamese jungles, in Cold War Berlin, in places whose names were still classified. This storm he would weather standing in the open, in the light, with his community beside him and his family behind him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be appeals, threats, attempts to minimize or reverse the changes. But tonight, in Pinewood, Virginia, justice had won a battle in an ongoing war. As the crowd began to disperse, Leonard walked home slowly, stopping to shake hands, except thanks he didn't feel he deserved. At his door, he found a package. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a challenge coin, the kind military units exchanged. This one bore no official insignia, just an engraving for the operative who finally came in from the cold to fight in the light. He knew who'd sent it, the FBI director, who'd been his protege, the woman who'd brought helicopters and justice to a small town that had forgotten what justice meant. Leonard placed the coin on his mantle next to his official decorations. Then he took his evening medication, the pills that had started everything, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow he would begin his work with the Reform Commission. Tomorrow the real work would begin. But tonight, Leonard Hayes slept peacefully in his own bed, in his own home, in a town that was finally slowly learning what it meant to protect and serve all its citizens equally. The Reform Commission's first meeting was scheduled for the following Monday in Richmond, and Leonard rose before dawn to prepare. The house was quiet, Patricia and Marcus having returned to their own home with promises to check in daily. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway broke the silence as Leonard, dressed in his charcoal suit, the one he'd worn to Pentagon briefings decades ago, when his advice shaped policies that would never be publicly acknowledged. The drive to Richmond took him through the Virginia countryside as it awakened to spring's full bloom. Dogwood trees lined the highway, their white blossoms like snow against the green, and Leonard found himself thinking about renewal, about second chances, about the persistence required for real change. His phone mounted on the dashboard showed 17 missed calls from reporters, 3 from federal prosecutors, and 1 from a number that made him pull over immediately. Leonard. The voice was aged but unmistakable General William Thornton, his commanding officer from operations that still didn't officially exist. Been following your situation. About time someone kicked that particular hornet's nest. General, didn't expect to hear from you. The Brotherhood has connections deeper than you know. Some of their sympathizers have military backgrounds, special operations training. Watch your 6. The line went dead. Thornton never stayed on unsecured lines longer than necessary, old habits from the Cold War, dying hard. Leonard sat for a moment on the roadside processing the warning. He'd assumed the Brotherhood was mainly local law enforcement, with delusions of grandeur. If they had special ops connections, the threat level had just escalated significantly. The commission meeting was held in a state building that had seen better days. Its marble floors worn smooth by decades of foot traffic, its walls bearing portraits of former governors whose own relationships with civil rights were complicated at best. Leonard was early as always and found Attorney General Martinez already there with coffee and a thick folder. Mr. Hayes, before the others arrive, I need to brief you on something. Mitchell's lawyer filed an appeal based on what they're calling prejudicial federal intervention. They're claiming your connections made a fair trial impossible. Let them claim what they want. The evidence was clear. It was, but they're trying to turn you into the story. The mysterious federal agent with the classified past who orchestrated Mitchell's downfall. They've got conspiracy theorists running with it online saying you're everything from CIA to Illuminati. Leonard almost laughed. If only they knew the truth was often stranger than their wildest theories. Let them talk. The facts remain facts. The other commission members began arriving. Dr. Keisha Williams, a criminologist from Howard University, whose research on police bias had been groundbreaking. Robert Chen, a former police chief from Seattle, who'd successfully reformed his department. Maria Santos, a civil rights attorney, who'd won landmark cases against police departments across the South. Judge Harold Washington, retired from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, whose opinions on constitutional rights were required reading in law schools. Ladies and gentlemen, Martinez began once they were assembled. We have a unique opportunity. The Pinewood incident has given us a window to push through reforms that have been blocked for decades. But we need to move fast. Public attention is fickle, and the forces opposing us are already organizing. Dr. Williams spread out data sheets across the conference table. The patterns are undeniable. What happened to Mr. Hayes happens thousands of times daily across America. The only difference is most victims don't have federal protection protocols. Which is exactly why we need systemic change, Chen added. Individual prosecutions matter, but without structural reform, we're just playing whack-a-mole with bad cops. They worked through lunch drafting recommendations that would fundamentally alter how police departments operated. Mandatory body cameras with automatic upload to federal servers. Civilian review boards with actual power to fire officers. Federal licensing for law enforcement revocable upon violation of civil rights. The end of qualified immunity for cases involving constitutional violations. This will face massive pushback, Judge Washington observed. Police unions will mobilize political opponents, will call it federal overreach. Then we need public support, Leonard said, speaking for the first time in an hour. The Brotherhood thought they were the silent majority. We need to prove the real majority wants justice, not just order. His phone vibrated. Jasmine texting from her classes at Howard. Grandpa, something's happening. Check the news. Leonard excused himself and stepped into the hallway, pulling up a news app. The headline made his blood run cold. 3 witnesses in Hayes' case found dead in apparent murder-suicide. The 3 witnesses were all former officers who'd agreed to testify about the Brotherhood's activities. The official story was that one had killed the other 2, then himself, leaving a note about the shame of betraying the thin blue line. But Leonard had seen enough staged scenes in his intelligence career to recognize the signs. He immediately called Director Morris. "You've seen the news." "We're on it. FBI and ATF are taking over the investigation." "This wasn't murder-suicide, Leonard. This was professional. Thornton warned me this morning. The Brotherhood has special ops connections." There was a pause. "How deep do your contacts still run?" "Deep enough. I'll make some calls." Leonard returned to the meeting, but the news had already reached the others. The mood had shifted from optimistic planning to grim determination. "They're trying to intimidate remaining witnesses," Santos said. "Classic suppression tactics." "Then we need to protect our people," Leonard responded. "Every witness, every whistleblower, every officer willing to break the blue wall of silence needs federal protection. Now." Martinez was already on her phone mobilizing resources. Within an hour, U.S. Marshals were being deployed to protect dozens of witnesses across 3 states. But Leonard knew protection was reactive. They needed to be proactive. That evening back in Pinewood, Leonard found his house under subtle but clear surveillance. Not the FBI protection detail he recognized, but others, a van that had been parked too long, a jogger who'd passed by 3 times without breaking a sweat. He called the number Thornton had used. "They're watching me," he said simply. "I know. We're watching them watch you. Old friends from the teams are in town, Leonard. The Brotherhood picked the wrong fight." Leonard understood. Thornton had activated his own network retired special operations personnel, who'd served with Leonard in operations that never made the newspapers. The Brotherhood thought they had military assets. They didn't realize Leonard had better ones. That night, unable to sleep, Leonard sat in his study reviewing the commission's draft proposals. His computer chimed with an encrypted message. The sender was identified only as Deutschlehrer, German teacher, a code name he hadn't seen in 30 years. "Kingfisher, the opposition has imported assets. 3 teams professionally trained. They plan to discredit you before eliminating you. Documents will surface tomorrow, alleging you were a double agent. Photos will be doctored. Stories will be placed. Character assassination before physical assassination. Take appropriate measures. Leonard leaned back in his chair. So it would be a disinformation campaign, first trying to destroy his credibility before the commission could finish its work. He'd faced similar tactics in East Germany and Nicaragua, in a dozen other places where truth was the first casualty. He made a decision. Opening his safe, he retrieved a flash drive he'd hoped never to use. It contained insurance documents, recordings, evidence of operations that would validate his service while maintaining necessary secrecy. If they wanted to play information warfare, he'd show them what a real intelligence officer could do. The next morning came with the predicted assault. A website appeared overnight, claiming to expose the truth about Leonard Hayes. Doctored photos showed him meeting with foreign agents. The faces changed, but the meetings real, though they'd been authorized operations. Fabricated documents suggested he'd sold secrets, betrayed assets, enriched himself through his service. The mainstream media initially ignored it, but social media exploded. Within hours, Hayesgate was trending. The Brotherhood's supporters spread the disinformation, eagerly adding their own embellishments. By noon, even legitimate news outlets were asking questions. Patricia called, furious. "Dad, this is libel. We need to sue." "No, we need to respond strategically. Come to the house. Bring Marcus and Jasmine. Family meeting." While waiting for them, Leonard received a call from Martinez. "The commission members are getting nervous. Some are suggesting we postpone." "That's what they want. We continue as planned. I'll handle the disinformation." His family arrived within the hour. Jasmine was crying, having read the horrible things being said about her grandfather online. Marcus was angry, wanting to fight back immediately. Patricia was in lawyer mode, already planning legal strategies. "Sit," Leonard commanded gently. "All of you. It's time I told you some things." He'd never fully explained his service to his family, the classification levels preventing it. But now, with his reputation under assault, some veils needed to be lifted. "The photos they're showing are real, but edited. I did meet with foreign agents to turn them to extract information to prevent attacks on American soil. The man they claim I was selling secrets to was actually a Soviet colonel I turned in 1978. He provided intelligence that prevented a nuclear incident." "Dad," Patricia whispered, "what did you really do all those years?" "I protected America. Sometimes that meant doing things that looked wrong from the outside, making deals with bad people to prevent worse people from succeeding. The Brotherhood found some of my operational photos, removed context, and weaponized them." "So how do we fight back?" Marcus asked. "With truth, but carefully deployed." Leonard showed them the flash drive. "This contains enough verified intelligence to validate my service without compromising ongoing operations. We release it strategically through Director Morris and official channels." Within 3 hours, the counteroffensive began. The FBI released a statement confirming Leonard's distinguished service with redacted documents showing commendations from 4 presidents. Former CIA directors, their identities protected, but their authority clear, vouched for his integrity. Veterans who'd served with him, men whose lives he'd saved in operations still classified, came forward with what details they could share. But the masterstroke came from an unexpected source. Tom Mitchell Dane's father went on national television. "They're trying to destroy Leonard Hayes because he exposed my son's crimes," the old Marine said, looking directly into the camera. "I know my son was guilty because I heard him planning these harassments. I saw the Brotherhood materials. Leonard Hayes is a patriot who my son targeted because of the color of his skin. These attacks on his character are just more of the same racism dressed up as patriotism." The tide turned quickly. The website was traced to servers linked to known white supremacist organizations. The doctored photos were exposed by digital forensics experts. The disinformation campaign collapsed within 48 hours, but Leonard knew the physical threat remained. That threat materialized Thursday evening. Leonard was returning from the pharmacy, the same routine that had started everything, when he noticed the tail. A black SUV maintaining perfect following distance, professional surveillance, rather than the amateur efforts of local Brotherhood supporters. He called Thornton's emergency number. "Contact. Black SUV, professional tail. We see them. 3 occupants. Continue normal route. Assets are moving." Leonard maintained his speed, showing no sign he'd noticed the surveillance. As he turned onto his street, the SUV accelerated clearly, planning to intercept him at his house where he'd be vulnerable getting out of his car. But as the SUV moved to block his driveway, 2 other vehicles appeared seemingly from nowhere, boxing it in. Men in civilian clothes but with military bearing emerged, weapons drawn, but not quite pointing at anyone, their presence alone enough to freeze the situation. "Gentlemen," one of them said to the SUV occupants, "you appear to be lost. This is a nice neighborhood, safe neighborhood, the kind where everyone looks out for each other, especially for respected elders who've served their country. You should probably leave. Now." The SUV occupants, Leonard could see them now. Hard men with the look of military contractors assessed the situation. They were outnumbered and outpositioned by men who were clearly their equals or betters in training. After a tense moment, the SUV reversed, drove away, and didn't return. "Thank you," Leonard said to his protectors as he got out of his car. "Don't thank us, Sean," the team leader replied. "Thank General Thornton, and yourself. We've all read your file, sir, the real one. It's an honor to watch your 6. That evening, Leonard's phone rang with a blocked number. When he answered, the voice was electronically distorted, but the message was clear. "Mr. Hayes, you've won this round. Mitchell's in prison, the Brotherhood is scattered, your reform commission will probably succeed. But America doesn't change. There will always be those of us who understand what this country really is, who it really belongs to. You're old. We're young. We can wait. Your victory is temporary. Our cause is eternal." "If your cause is eternal," Leonard replied calmly, "then it's eternally wrong, and there will always be people like me to stand against it." The line went dead. The next commission meeting was moved to a federal facility with enhanced security. The death of the 3 witnesses had sobered everyone, made clear the stakes involved, but it had also hardened their resolve. "They want us afraid," Dr. Williams said. "They want us to back down, to accept incremental change instead of real reform. We can't let them win." The proposals they drafted were sweeping. A federal database of police misconduct accessible to all departments, to prevent bad cops from simply moving jurisdictions. Mandatory de-escalation training with annual recertification. Community policing requirements that forced officers to actually live in the communities they served. And most controversially, personal liability insurance for officers, similar to malpractice insurance for doctors. "The unions will go ballistic," Chen observed. "Good," Santos replied. "If they're not screaming, we're not pushing hard enough." Leonard contributed his own insights drawn from decades of assessing threats and vulnerabilities. The Brotherhood succeeded because of institutional blindness. Departments didn't want to see the patterns, didn't want to acknowledge the problems. We need oversight that can't be corrupted or co-opted. "Federal oversight?" Judge Washington asked. "Independent oversight. Civilian boards with federal backing but local knowledge. People who understand their communities but aren't beholden to the power structures." As the meeting continued, Leonard's phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. She'd been interviewing other victims of police harassment for a documentary project, turning her grandfather's experience into a broader narrative. "Grandpa, you need to see what I'm finding. It's not just Pinewood. The Brotherhood has chapters everywhere. This is huge. Leonard excused himself to call her. How huge? I've documented connections in 37 states. They use different names: Patriot Guard, American Defenders, Thin Blue Line, Brotherhood, but the tactics are identical. Targeted harassment of minorities, especially elderly black men, who they see as vulnerable. Send me everything, encrypted. When the files arrived, Leonard saw the scope of what they were really fighting. This wasn't just a few bad cops or even a single organization. It was a network, a cancer, that had metastasized throughout American law enforcement. The Reform Commission's proposals, sweeping as they were, suddenly seemed almost inadequate. He returned to the meeting with the new intelligence. The room fell silent as he presented Jasmine's findings, the web of connections, the scope of the systematic targeting. My God, Martinez breathed. This is a shadow law enforcement system, a parallel structure operating within legitimate departments. And now we know about it, Leonard said. The question is, what do we do about it? The answer came from an unexpected source. Robert Chen pulled out his phone, showing a message from current police chiefs across the country. They want in. Good cops, honest departments, they're tired of being tarred with the same brush as the Brotherhood. They want to help clean house. Over the next 3 days, the commission worked almost around the clock, coordinating with law enforcement officials who wanted reform, civil rights organizations ready to support change, and federal authorities prepared to enforce it. The Brotherhood had overplayed their hand with the witness murders and the attempt on Leonard. Public opinion had shifted decisively. Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors to Leonard's home. 3 young Marines in dress blues standing at his door with perfect military bearing. Mr. Hayes, sir, we're from Camp Lejeune. We wanted to thank you. Leonard invited them in, confused. Thank me for what? Sir, my brother was one of Mitchell's victims 2 years ago, the lead Marine, a sergeant, explained. Arrested for suspicious activity while home on leave. The charges were dropped, but it almost cost him his security clearance, his career. You've given us justice we never thought we'd see. They stayed for coffee, these young warriors, so different, yet so similar to the men Leonard had served with decades ago. They talked about service, about duty, about what America meant to them, a country worth fighting for, precisely because it could acknowledge and correct its failures. After they left, Leonard found himself in his garden, tending the tomatoes he'd planted before his arrest. The simple act of nurturing growth felt like a metaphor for the work ahead. Change, real change, was like gardening. It required patience, constant attention, and the faith that seeds planted today would bear fruit tomorrow. That evening, Director Morris called with news. The Attorney General is presenting the Commission's recommendations to the President on Monday, with the full backing of the Justice Department. Leonard, this is happening. Real federal police reform, comprehensive and mandatory. What about the Brotherhood, the network Jasmine uncovered? RICO investigations in 17 states. We're going to dismantle them piece by piece. It'll take years, but we have the roadmap now, thanks to your granddaughter's work. After the call, Leonard sat with Patricia and Jasmine on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. The threats hadn't ended. There had been 2 more death threats that week, but something had shifted. The shadows where the Brotherhood operated were being illuminated, their tactics exposed, their support eroding. Was it worth it, Dad? Patricia asked. All of this from just trying to pick up your prescription. It was worth it the moment they put those handcuffs on me, Leonard replied. Because if they could do it to me with my background, my connections, imagine what they were doing to people without those advantages. Yes, it was worth it. Jasmine was editing her documentary on her laptop, adding interviews she'd conducted that day. Grandpa, I got Officer Thompson to go on record about the pressure she faced to participate in the targeting. She's risking everything to speak truth. That's what courage looks like, Leonard said. Not the absence of fear, but action despite it. His phone rang. It was Sheriff Rodriguez from Pinewood PD. Mr. Hayes, I wanted you to know, we just completed our first week of reformed operations. 0 complaints, community engagement up 300%. We're hosting a town hall next week to discuss further improvements. Would you consider attending? I'll be there. As night fell, Leonard thought about the journey from that Thursday morning to now. Mitchell was in federal prison, the Brotherhood was being dismantled, and real reform was moving from proposal to policy. But he knew this was just the beginning. Changing laws was easier than changing hearts, and the attitudes that created the Brotherhood still existed in too many communities. The war for equality, for justice, for the true meaning of protect and serve would continue long after Leonard was gone. But he'd done his part, had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for justice. The classified operations of his youth had protected America from external enemies. This very public battle was protecting Americans from internal ones. His phone buzzed one more time. A message from a number he didn't recognize, but the authentication code identified it as someone from his intelligence past. Kingfisher, your current operation may be your most important. The Brotherhood thought they were patriots. You're showing them what patriotism really means. Stay strong. Stay safe. The community you're building is the best counterintelligence against hatred. Leonard deleted the message but kept the sentiment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new opportunities to push for change. But tonight, sitting with his family, watching his quiet street where neighbors looked out for each other. Regardless of color, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope that America could become what it had always promised to be. The sound of sirens in the distance didn't make him tense anymore. Sheriff Rodriguez had kept her word. Every traffic stop in Pinewood was now recorded, reviewed, and held to the highest standard. The youth center where Leonard volunteered had become a model for police community engagement, with officers playing basketball, with kids building relationships instead of rap sheets. As Patricia and Jasmine prepared to leave, Leonard hugged them both tightly. "I'm proud of you, Grandpa," Jasmine whispered. "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us." "The work's not done," Leonard reminded her. "I know. That's why I'm changing my major. Criminal justice and journalism, double major. Someone needs to keep telling these stories, keep shining light in dark corners." After they left, Leonard stood in his doorway, looking out at Pinewood. Porch lights were on, families were settling in for the evening, and somewhere a child laughed, the sound carrying on the night air like a promise. This was what he'd fought for all those years in shadows and secret operations. Not abstract concepts of democracy or freedom, but this communities where children could laugh without fear, where elderly men could pick up their prescriptions without harassment, where the color of one's skin didn't determine the quality of justice received. The Brotherhood had thought they owned America, that it belonged to them by birthright. They were wrong. America belonged to everyone willing to fight for its ideals, to stand against its failures, to demand it live up to its promises. And that fight, Leonard knew, would continue tomorrow, next week, next year. But tonight, for just tonight, he'd won. An old soldier's final mission was succeeding not through force of arms, but through force of will, not through classified operations, but through public courage. The phone calls would come tomorrow, more threats, more challenges, more opportunities to push forward. The Reform Commission would face political opposition, legal challenges, institutional resistance. Leonard was ready for all of it. At 73, when most men his age were fading into quiet retirement, he'd found his second war, his final mission. And this time the battlefield was in the open. The enemy was exposed, and the Allies were multiplying every day. He took his evening medication, those pills that had started everything, and headed to bed. Tomorrow, the work would continue. But tonight, Leonard Hayes slept the sleep of a warrior who'd found one more battle worth fighting, one more cause worth serving, one more chance to protect and serve the America he'd always believed in, even when it didn't believe in him. The town hall meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock Tuesday evening, but by 6:30, the Pinewood Community Center was already overflowing. Leonard arrived early, with Patricia finding the parking lot full and news vans positioned strategically for the best shots. The transformation of their small town into a national symbol of police reform had brought attention they'd never sought, but couldn't now avoid. Inside, Sheriff Rodriguez was directing the setup with military precision, her officers helping arrange chairs rather than standing guard, a small but significant change in approach. She spotted Leonard and made her way over, her expression mixing respect with something that looked like relief. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming. Your presence means everything to this community." "Sheriff, this is your meeting. I'm just a resident who wants to see our town heal." "With respect, sir, you're much more than that now. You're the conscience of Pinewood, whether you wanted that role or not." The crowd was diverse in a way Pinewood gatherings had never been before. Black families who'd previously avoided civic engagement sat next to white neighbors who'd never questioned the status quo. Young activists with recording equipment mixed with elderly residents who remembered when the town's racial lines were even more starkly drawn. Officer Thompson was there in civilian clothes, sitting with other reform-minded officers who'd risked their careers to speak truth. Leonard took a seat in the third row, deliberately avoiding the front row position they'd reserved for him. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about Pinewood finding its way forward. But as the meeting began, he noticed something troubling. A group of men in the back, wearing matching black shirts with thin blue line flags, their faces hard and unwelcoming, Brotherhood sympathizers here to disrupt. Sheriff Rodriguez opened the meeting with remarkable candor. "We failed you. For years, the Pinewood Police Department operated under policies and attitudes that betrayed our oath to protect and serve all citizens equally. That stops now." She outlined the reforms already implemented: body cameras, civilian oversight, de-escalation training, residency requirements for officers. But when she opened the floor for questions, one of the black-shirted men stood immediately. "Sheriff, you're destroying the morale of good officers to appease criminals and race baiters. What about supporting our police?" The room tensed. This was the confrontation everyone had expected, but hoped to avoid. Rodriguez started to respond, but Leonard stood slowly, his movement drawing all eyes. "May I?" he asked the sheriff, who nodded. Leonard turned to face the man who'd spoken, Kyle Brennan, whose son was a state trooper, whose Facebook posts about the war on police were legendary in their vitriol. "Mr. Brennan, I served 38 years defending this country. I've been shot at by enemies, foreign and domestic. I've lost brothers in arms, men who died wearing the uniform. So when I tell you that supporting police means holding them to the highest standards, I speak from experience. A badge is not a license to oppress. It's a sacred trust. Officers who violate that trust dishonor every good cop who's ever worn the uniform. You got one bad cop fired and now you're trying to tear down the whole system," Brennan shot back. "One bad cop." Leonard's voice remained calm but carried steel underneath. 43 officers across 3 states have been indicted. 3 witnesses were murdered to protect their network. This isn't about one bad apple, Mr. Brennan. This is about an orchard with root rot, and we're trying to save the healthy trees by cutting out the disease. Another Brotherhood sympathizer stood. "You used federal connections to avoid justice yourself. You're no hero. You're a hypocrite who played the race card when you got caught." Patricia started to stand, her face flushed with anger, but Leonard touched her shoulder gently, keeping her seated. He'd faced interrogation by KGB agents. He could handle small-town antagonists. "I was arrested for picking up heart medication while black. The federal connections you reference were protocols in place since the Cold War, when this country needed people like me to do jobs people like you will never know about. But you're right about one thing: I shouldn't have needed those connections. No citizen should. That's exactly why we're here tonight, to ensure that equal justice doesn't require special phone numbers." The crowd erupted in applause, drowning out the Brotherhood sympathizers' attempts to respond. Sheriff Rodriguez restored order, but the tone had been set. This wasn't going to be a polite discussion of minor reforms. This was about fundamentally reimagining public safety in Pinewood. For the next 2 hours, residents shared stories. Maria Gonzalez described being pulled over 17 times in 3 years, always for equipment violations that mysteriously never resulted in tickets. Jamal Washington, honor student and track star, recounted being handcuffed and searched in his own driveway because he fit a description. Sarah Kim, a nurse at the local hospital, told of watching black colleagues get stopped in the hospital parking lot by officers who couldn't believe they worked there. Each story added weight to the truth Leonard's arrest had exposed. Pinewood had been 2 towns occupying the same space, one where law enforcement meant protection, another where it meant persecution. But there were other voices, too. Officer Janet Thompson stood, her voice shaking but determined. "I became a cop to help people, but I was trained to see threats instead of citizens, to control instead of serve. The Brotherhood didn't recruit me, but they shaped the culture I worked in. I'm ashamed of stops I made, arrests I participated in. Mr. Hayes's case woke me up. We need these reforms not to punish good cops, but to help us actually be good cops." As the meeting progressed, Leonard noticed movement outside. More black-shirted figures were gathering in the parking lot. His phone vibrated, a text from one of Thornton's watchers. "Trouble brewing. Stay inside. We're monitoring." Sheriff Rodriguez must have received similar intelligence, because she quietly positioned officers near the exits, not threateningly, but present. The meeting continued, but tension was building like the static before a thunderstorm. The explosion came from Kyle Brennan again. "This is all based on a lie. Leonard Hayes is a federal plant, a deep state operative sent to destroy traditional America. I have proof." He held up a manila folder, and Leonard recognized the disinformation that had been spread online, the doctored photos, the fabricated documents. Despite their thorough debunking, true believers clung to the conspiracy theories. "Mr. Brennan," Judge Washington spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench. "Those documents have been examined by federal forensics experts and proven false. You're repeating lies in a public forum, which edges dangerously close to defamation." "Of course you'd say that," another sympathizer shouted. "You're all part of it, the replacement, the destruction of white—" "Stop." The voice was unexpected. Tom Mitchell Dane's father, standing with difficulty, his Marine Corps cap in his weathered hands. "Just stop. My son is in federal prison because he believed that garbage. Because I let him believe it. Mr. Hayes served this country with more honor than you can imagine. I've seen his real record, what little they'd let me see. While you were spreading hate on Facebook, he was risking his life for America. The only conspiracy here is the one my son participated in, a conspiracy to deny equal justice under law. And it failed." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of a father's confession hanging in the air. Then something unexpected happened. Robert Anderson, a white minister, who'd been silent until now, stood. "Tom's right. We've been complicit through silence. Every time we didn't speak up when we heard the jokes, the comments, the casual racism. Every time we benefited from a system tilted in our favor and didn't question it. This isn't about destroying America. It's about America finally keeping its promises. The Brotherhood sympathizers were outnumbered, now their attempts at disruption failing against a community finding its collective voice. But as the meeting neared its end, the situation outside was escalating. Through the windows, Leonard could see the crowd in the parking lot had grown to perhaps 50 people, some carrying signs with thin blue line flags, others with more explicitly racist messages they'd been emboldened to display. Sheriff Rodriguez received a message on her radio, her expression darkening. "We have a situation developing. I'm going to ask everyone to remain inside while we—" The sound of breaking glass interrupted her. A brick had come through one of the community center windows, landing near where children were sitting. Screams erupted, parents pulling their kids close, and Leonard saw the nightmare scenario unfolding, a confrontation that could turn violent, that could undo all the progress they'd made. "Everyone stay calm," Rodriguez commanded her officers, moving to protective positions. "This building is secure. We have backup coming." But Leonard knew escalation would only feed the narrative the Brotherhood wanted: chaos, violence, proof that integration and reform led to disorder. He made a decision that Patricia would later call either the bravest or most foolish thing he'd ever done. "Sheriff, let me go out and talk to them." "Absolutely not. Mr. Hayes, those people want you dead." "Some of them, maybe. But others are just afraid, confused, clinging to a worldview that's crumbling." "I've negotiated with terrorists, Sheriff. These are angry Americans. Let me try." The debate was brief but intense. Finally, Rodriguez agreed, but only with conditions. Leonard would be wired surrounded by plainclothes officers, and at the first sign of violence, they'd extract him. Leonard walked out the front door of the community center into a wall of noise. The crowd surged forward, held back only by a thin line of officers. Signs waved, "Support our police," "Hayes is a traitor," "White lives matter." But Leonard also saw faces he recognized, neighbors, customers from local stores, people who'd nodded politely to him for 15 years while harboring these beliefs. He raised his hands, and surprisingly, the crowd quieted slightly, curious what the man they'd demonized would say. "I see anger here." Leonard began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded attention in hostile territories worldwide. "I see fear. I see Americans who feel their country is changing in ways they don't understand or want. I understand that feeling. I'm 73 years old. The America I was born into is gone too." Some in the crowd looked confused. This wasn't what they'd expected. "The America I was born into said I couldn't eat at certain restaurants, couldn't live in certain neighborhoods, couldn't serve my country in certain capacities. That America is gone and good riddance. But here's what hasn't changed: the promise that all men are created equal, that justice should be blind, that the law should protect everyone equally. That's not destroying America. That's America finally growing into its founding promises." "You destroyed a good cop's life," someone shouted. "Officer Mitchell destroyed his own life the moment he decided his badge made him judge, jury, and executioner of who belonged and who didn't. He betrayed his oath. I simply held him accountable." Kyle Brennan pushed to the front. "You're trying to replace us, make whites a minority in our own country." Leonard looked at him with something almost like pity. "Mr. Brennan, I've spent my entire life as a minority in my own country. My ancestors built this nation with forced labor, my fathers fought for it in segregated units, and I served it in operations you're not cleared to know about. Yet I've never felt the need to oppress others to feel American. If your identity requires standing on someone else's neck, then yes, that identity needs replacing. The crowd was splitting now, some still angry, but others looking thoughtful, perhaps hearing their beliefs challenged in ways that actually penetrated. But the hardcore Brotherhood supporters weren't interested in dialogue. "Traitor!" someone screamed, and Leonard saw the bottle flying toward him, before his security did. He didn't flinch, didn't move, and the bottle shattered harmlessly on the ground nearby. The lack of reaction seemed to deflate the thrower more than any retaliation would have. "I've been called traitor before," Leonard said calmly. "By Soviet agents when I turned their assets. By terrorists when I disrupted their operations. Now by Americans when I demand equal justice. I'll wear that label proudly if treason means standing for the Constitution over comfort, for justice over just us." Sirens were approaching state police federal agents, the overwhelming force Rodriguez had called for. The crowd began to disperse, some running, others walking away slowly, and a few actually approaching Leonard, with extended hands, apologizing, saying they'd gotten caught up in something they didn't fully understand. As the parking lot cleared, Leonard found himself standing with Sheriff Rodriguez, Officer Thompson, and surprisingly, Kyle Brennan, who hadn't fled with the others. "Why?" Brennan asked, his voice smaller now, confused. "Why do you care so much about changing things?" Leonard thought about all the classified operations, the times he'd risked his life for a country that didn't always value him equally. "Because I've seen what America can be when we work together. I've served alongside heroes of every color, every creed. I've seen us accomplish impossible things when we focus on our common purpose instead of our surface differences. Mitchell and his Brotherhood represent America's worst impulse: tribalism, fear, the zero-sum belief that someone else's gain is your loss. I'm fighting for America's best impulse, the belief that we're stronger together, that justice for one is justice for all." Brennan stood there for a long moment, processing. Then, without another word, he walked away. But Leonard noticed he left his sign behind, abandoned in the parking lot. Back inside the community center, the town hall resumed with renewed energy. The confrontation had crystallized something. Pinewood had to choose what kind of town it wanted to be. The vote on the reform proposals was unanimous, even some former skeptics raising their hands in support. As the meeting ended, Jasmine appeared with her camera, having filmed everything for her documentary. "Grandpa, that was incredible. You could have been hurt, killed even. But I wasn't. And sometimes, sweetheart, you have to stand in the breach to be the bridge between what was and what should be. That's what service really means." The ride home was quiet, Patricia driving, while Leonard watched the familiar streets pass by. Every corner held a memory now, where he'd been stopped for matching a description, where Officer Mitchell had first started following him, where the community had stood guard after his arrest. Pinewood was writing a new story over its old one, and Leonard had become both author and protagonist. At home, his phone was ringing off the hook. National news wanted interviews about the confrontation. The Reform Commission wanted his assessment. Director Morris wanted to ensure he was safe. But Leonard ignored them all for the moment, stepping out into his backyard, where his garden grew in neat rows. The tomatoes were coming in nicely red and full of promise. He picked one still warm from the day's sun and bit into it, the taste reminding him of summers at his grandmother's house in rural Alabama, before he knew words like segregation or discrimination, when the world was just family and food and the simple joy of growing things. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He expected another threat, but instead found a message that made him sit down heavily on his garden bench. "Mr. Hayes, this is David Mitchell Dane's younger brother. I'm a sophomore at VMI. I wanted you to know that what happened to you, what my brother did, it opened my eyes. I've been living in a bubble of privilege I didn't even see. I'm changing my major to criminal justice. I want to be the kind of cop my brother should have been. The kind who would protect you, not profile you. Thank you for your courage. It's changing more lives than you know." Leonard read the message 3 times, feeling something shift in his chest. This was what victory actually looked like, not the imprisonment of enemies, but the conversion of hearts, the next generation choosing a different path. Patricia came out with tea, sitting beside him, in comfortable silence. The stars were coming out, and somewhere in the distance they could hear music from the community center, where young people were holding a unity dance, something unimaginable just months ago. "Dad, what you did tonight facing that crowd, Mom would have been proud." "She would have been terrified," Leonard corrected with a slight smile. "Then proud. Evelyn never did like my tendency to walk into danger. But you always came back. I had something to come back to. That makes all the difference." His phone rang General Thornton on the encrypted line. "Leonard, we've intercepted chatter. The Brotherhood is planning something bigger, a multi-state action. They're calling it the Day of Restoration. Mass demonstrations, possibly violence targeting reform advocates. When 2 weeks, during the Commission's presentation to Congress. They want to disrupt it, make it politically impossible to pass federal reforms." Leonard processed this, his mind shifting back into operational mode. "Then we need to be ready. Can you share the intelligence with Director Morris?" "Already done. Leonard, they've marked you as their primary target, symbol to symbol. If they can break you, they think they can break the movement. Let them try. I've faced KGB, Stasi, Republican Guard. The Brotherhood of Order is amateur hour compared to them." But even as he said it, Leonard knew this was different. Those had been foreign enemies, clear in their opposition. These were Americans' neighbors, people who shopped at the same stores and attended the same churches. The battle lines weren't geographic, but ideological, running through the heart of every community. That night, unable to sleep, Leonard worked on his testimony for the congressional hearing. The Reform Commission's proposals would face fierce opposition from police unions, conservative politicians, and the millions of Americans who saw any change as an attack on their identity. His words could make the difference. He wrote about duty and service, about the oath he'd taken at 18 and honored for decades. He wrote about the America he'd fought for in shadows and the America he was fighting for in daylight. He wrote about Officer Mitchell not as a monster, but as a symptom, a man whose prejudices had been weaponized by a system that rewarded aggression over compassion. At 3 a.m, Jasmine texted him. She was pulling an all-nighter, editing her documentary, trying to finish it before the congressional hearing. "Can't sleep either," he texted back. "Too much history happening. Don't want to miss it." "You're not missing it. You're making it." As dawn approached, Leonard finally slept, but his dreams were restless. He was back in Berlin 1983, meeting with an asset in a safe house when the Stasi burst in. But when they removed their helmets, they had the faces of Brotherhood members, of Officer Mitchell, of all the people who'd looked at him and seen threat instead of citizen. He woke to his phone ringing. Director Morris, her voice tense. "Leonard, we've had a development. Mitchell wants to make a deal. Full cooperation, names, dates, everything about the Brotherhood's structure and plans, in exchange for reduced sentence." "What do you need from me?" "The prosecutors want your input. You're the primary victim. Your opinion carries weight." Leonard thought about Mitchell standing in his rain-soaked driveway full of rage and bewilderment. About Tom Mitchell's tears as he testified against his own son. About David Mitchell's message of transformation. If he provides actionable intelligence that prevents violence and helps dismantle the network, I support the deal. Not because I forgive him, but because stopping the Brotherhood matters more than punishing one man. You're a better person than I am, Leonard. No, I'm just old enough to know that revenge and justice aren't the same thing. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Security assessments, strategy sessions, coordination with law enforcement across multiple states. The day of restoration was shaping up to be a significant threat, but forewarned was forearmed. Federal and state authorities were mobilizing infiltrating planning cells, preparing counters to every scenario. Leonard found himself at the center of it all, his kitchen table covered with classified briefings, secure phones, encrypted laptops. Patricia joked that their house had become a forward operating base, but there was truth in the humor. The final battle for police reform was approaching, and Pinewood had become command central. 3 nights before the congressional hearing, Leonard was reviewing his testimony one last time when a knock came at his door. He checked the security camera, no one there. But on his porch was a package, no return address. The bomb squad was called, the block evacuated, robot deployed. But the package wasn't a bomb. It was a folded American flag, the kind given to families at military funerals with a note, "For your service, both then and now, from officers who remember their oath." Inside the flag was something else, a flash drive containing hundreds of hours of recordings from inside the Brotherhood. Officers discussing targets, planning harassments, celebrating successful civil rights violations. Mitchell had come through with his cooperation, providing evidence that would destroy the network completely. Leonard stood on his porch, holding the flag as neighbors returned to their homes. The flag was worn clearly, one that had flown somewhere important, and he wondered which officers had risked everything to send this message of support. The Reform Commission met one final time before the congressional hearing. The proposals were refined, strengthened by the new intelligence backed by evidence that made opposition difficult. They had testimonies from officers, victims, experts, and reformers. They had data showing how community policing reduced crime more effectively than aggressive enforcement. They had everything except certainty that Congress would act. "Whatever happens," Martinez said as the meeting ended, "we've already won something. We've changed the conversation. We've exposed the truth. We've given people hope that change is possible." Leonard looked around the table at these people who'd become comrades in an unexpected war. "We've done more than that. We've proved that America can confront its failures without being destroyed by them. That's the real victory." As he prepared to leave for Washington, Leonard stood in his garden one last time, watching the sun set over Pinewood. The town looked the same as it had the morning of his arrest, but everything had changed. The youth center where he volunteered now hosted police community basketball games. Morrison's pharmacy had a sign in the window, "All customers welcome, all citizens respected." Joe's Diner had become an informal meeting place for reform advocates and reformed officers alike. His phone rang, Jasmine calling from Howard. "Grandpa, I finished the documentary. I'm calling it The Thursday That Changed Everything. Want to know how it ends?" "How does it end?" "With you in your garden growing things. Because that's what you do, you grow things. Tomatoes, communities, hope. You plant seeds and trust they'll bloom." Leonard smiled, looking at his tomato plants heavy with fruit. "That's all any of us can do, sweetheart. Plant seeds and trust." Tomorrow he would testify before Congress, face the opposition's fury, stand as the symbol of a movement that had grown beyond him. The Brotherhood would attempt their day of restoration, trying to drag America backward. The battle would be fierce, the outcome uncertain. But tonight, in his garden in Pinewood, Leonard Hayes was at peace. He'd served his country in war and peace, in shadow and light. This final mission, the mission to make America live up to its promises, was perhaps his most important. Win or lose, he'd stood in the breach. He'd been the bridge. He'd served. The sound of children playing drifted over from the park. Black and white kids together. Their laughter unconscious of the battles being fought for their futures. That sound, Leonard thought, was worth any risk, any sacrifice. That was the America worth fighting for. The train to Washington departed at dawn, and Leonard found himself in a secured car with federal marshals positioned at both ends. The threat assessment for the congressional hearing had been elevated to critical after intelligence revealed the Brotherhood's Day of Restoration wasn't just planned protests, but coordinated attacks on reform advocates nationwide. Patricia sat across from him, having insisted on accompanying him, despite the danger, her laptop open as she reviewed his testimony one final time. "Dad, they're going to come at you hard during questioning. Senator Blackwood is already calling you a racial provocateur on cable news." Leonard watched the Virginia countryside blur past the window, thinking about all the times he'd made this journey to Washington for classified briefings no one would ever know about. This time, the entire nation would be watching. "Let them come. I've testified before hostile audiences in my time. Not like this. Not with millions watching live." His phone buzzed with a message from Director Morris. "Mitchell's information was gold. We've prevented 3 attacks already this morning. Brotherhood cells in Texas, Ohio, and Georgia. Stay alert. They're desperate." The Union Station arrival was a choreographed security operation. Leonard was moved from train to armored vehicle in seconds, but not before he glimpsed the crowds already gathering supporters with signs reading "Justice for All," facing off against counter-protesters waving thin blue line flags. The division in America was visible, tangible, potentially violent. The Hart Senate office building was a fortress that morning. Metal detectors, bomb-sniffing dogs, snipers on the roof. Inside, the Judiciary Committee hearing room was packed beyond capacity, with overflow rooms set up for public viewing. Leonard recognized faces in the gallery, civil rights leaders, police union representatives, journalists who'd been covering the story since his arrest, and surprisingly, Tom Mitchell, sitting alone in a back corner, his Marine Corps cap in his lap. Senator Rebecca Morrison, the committee chair, and a former prosecutor called the hearing to order. "We're here today to examine the National Police Reform Act legislation that would fundamentally alter law enforcement in America. Our first witness is Mr. Leonard Hayes, whose case initiated this national reckoning." Leonard stood, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The oath felt heavier than usual, carrying the weight of not just his own story, but the stories of countless others who'd never get this platform. "Mr. Hayes," Senator Morrison began, "please tell us in your own words what happened on that Thursday morning in Pinewood." Leonard spoke for 30 minutes without interruption, his voice steady and clear. He didn't just recount his arrest, but contextualized it within patterns of harassment, the Brotherhood's network, the systematic targeting of minorities disguised as law enforcement. He presented evidence from Mitchell's cooperation statistics, compiled by Jasmine's research testimonies, from officers who'd broken the blue wall of silence. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment, before Senator Morrison spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Your service to this country, both in uniform and out, is exemplary." But then Senator Blackwood leaned into his microphone, his face flushed with barely contained anger. "Mr. Hayes, isn't it true that you used classified government connections to avoid normal legal procedures?" "Senator, I used emergency protocols established during the Cold War for intelligence assets in danger. Protocols that exist because America recognized that some of its servants operate in spaces where normal procedures don't apply." "So you're admitting you received special treatment?" "I'm admitting I had resources most Americans don't have. That's precisely the problem. Every American should have protection from false arrest, not just those with classified service records. Blackwood shifted tactics. You've destroyed the career of a decorated officer based on one incident. 43 incidents, Leonard interrupted calmly. Officer Mitchell arrested 43 black men over 60 in 3 years. 3 convictions. That's not one incident, Senator. That's a pattern of abuse. These reforms you're pushing would handcuff law enforcement, make our streets more dangerous. Senator, I spent 38 years in intelligence. I know what real danger looks like. A grandmother afraid to send her grandson to the store isn't safety. A veteran unable to pick up medication without harassment isn't order. Fear dressed up as law enforcement isn't protection, it's oppression. The questioning continued for 2 hours, alternating between supportive senators who drew out more details of the Brotherhood's network and hostile ones who tried to paint Leonard as an agitator, exploiting one bad arrest. Through it all, Leonard remained composed, using his intelligence training to stay 3 steps ahead of their arguments. During a recess, Leonard stepped into the hallway to find chaos. Reports were coming in of Brotherhood demonstrations erupting nationwide. In Dallas, protesters had surrounded a federal courthouse. In Atlanta, they'd blocked highways. In Portland, counter-protesters had engaged them directly, violence erupting. Director Morris appeared at his elbow. It's starting. The day of restoration. But we're ready. Federal agents are moving on all known Brotherhood leadership simultaneously. This is their last gasp. Or their first shot in something longer, Leonard said quietly. Back in the hearing room, more witnesses testified. Officer Thompson spoke about the pressure to participate in racial profiling. Sheriff Rodriguez detailed Pinewood's successful reforms and dropping crime rates. Dr. Williams presented data showing that community policing was more effective than aggressive enforcement. Each testimony built on Leonard's foundation, creating an overwhelming case for reform. But the most powerful moment came from an unexpected source. During public comment, Tom Mitchell approached the microphone, his hands shaking as he adjusted it. Senators, my name is Tom Mitchell. My son Dane is the officer who arrested Mr. Hayes. I'm here to tell you that everything Mr. Hayes has said is true. I raised my son in hatred, dressed up as heritage, fear disguised as tradition. The Brotherhood didn't corrupt him, it gave him a structure for beliefs our family had passed down like poisoned heirlooms. These reforms aren't an attack on police. They're an attempt to save policing from people like my son, like the man I used to be. His voice broke as he continued. I served in Vietnam alongside black Marines who saved my life. I came home and forgot. Those bonds chose comfort of prejudice over discomfort of growth. Mr. Hayes served too, with more distinction than most of us will ever know. When my son arrested him, he wasn't maintaining order. He was continuing America's original sin. Please don't let my family's failure become America's future. Pass these reforms. The room was silent as Tom Mitchell returned to his seat. Even Senator Blackwood seemed momentarily subdued. But the quiet was shattered by commotion from outside, chanting sirens, the sound of confrontation escalating. Senator Morrison called a recess, and Leonard found himself in a secured room with federal agents monitoring multiple screens showing scenes from across the country. The Brotherhood's day of restoration had become a national crisis, but something unexpected was happening. In city after city, the Brotherhood protesters were being vastly outnumbered by reform supporters. In Birmingham, church congregations had formed human chains protecting federal buildings. In Chicago, off-duty officers in uniform stood with reform advocates. In Los Angeles, veterans groups had mobilized, their message clear: Leonard Hayes had served his country, and they stood with him. It's backfiring, Morris observed with satisfaction. The Brotherhood wanted to show strength. Instead, they're showing America why reform is necessary. Leonard's phone rang. Jasmine calling from Howard, where students had organized their own demonstration. "Grandpa, are you watching? The whole country is standing up. Your testimony, it lit a fire." "It's not my fire, sweetheart. It belongs to everyone who's been stopped, searched, arrested for being the wrong color in the wrong place. I just gave it a spark." The hearing resumed amid heightened tension. Senator Blackwood made one last attempt to derail things. "Mr. Hayes, if these reforms pass, if police are handicapped by federal oversight, who will protect law-abiding citizens from criminals?" Leonard stood slowly, his bearing military straight, despite his 73 years. "Senator, I've protected America my entire adult life. I've faced real enemies, foreign agents, terrorists, threats you're not cleared to know about. But the greatest threat to America isn't crime. It's the betrayal of our principles. When officers like Mitchell can operate with impunity, when networks like the Brotherhood can infiltrate law enforcement, when citizens fear those sworn to protect them, that's the real danger. These reforms don't handicap police. They liberate them to be what they should always have been: guardians, not warriors, protectors, not predators." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You ask who will protect law-abiding citizens. Law-abiding police will officers who honor their oath to the Constitution, not to a brotherhood of bias. That's who'll protect America, the same people who always have when we let them." The committee voted that afternoon, 11-7 in favor of sending the National Police Reform Act to the full Senate. It was a victory, but a narrow one, and the full vote would be even closer. As Leonard left the hearing room, he found hundreds of supporters waiting in the hallway, applauding as he passed. But he also saw the Brotherhood sympathizers, their faces twisted with rage held back by Capitol Police. One broke through, rushing at Leonard with something in his hand. Secret Service agents moved to intercept, but Leonard reacted faster, muscle memory from decades of training. He sidestepped, using the attacker's momentum against him, sending him sprawling. The object clattered across the marble floor, not a weapon, but a photograph. Leonard picked it up, recognizing it immediately. It was from his classified service, showing him with an asset in East Berlin, but doctored to make it look sinister. "This is what you really are," the attacker screamed as he was restrained. "A traitor, a deep state operative destroying America." Leonard looked at him with something approaching pity. "Son, I was protecting America before you were born. I'm still protecting it now from people who mistake their privilege for patriotism, their fear for wisdom." The ride back to Pinewood was in an armored convoy, federal protection now permanent, given the escalated threats. Patricia drove while Leonard watched news coverage on his phone. The day of restoration had failed spectacularly. Federal agents had arrested over 200 Brotherhood members on charges ranging from conspiracy to domestic terrorism. The network was unraveling Mitchell's cooperation, providing a roadmap to every cell, every leader, every plan. But Leonard knew this wasn't over. The Brotherhood was a symptom, not the disease. The attitudes that created it, the fears that fed it, the prejudices that sustained it, those wouldn't disappear with arrests and legislation. Pinewood looked different when they arrived. American flags flew from many houses, but not in defiance, in affirmation. Signs in yards read, "Pinewood stands with Hayes," and "Reform now." The town had chosen its side, and it was the side of change. At his house, Leonard found a crowd waiting. Not protesters, but neighbors, supporters, people whose lives had been touched by his stand. Martha from the pharmacy was there with fresh-baked cookies. Joe from the diner had brought coffee for everyone. The youth center kids had made a banner, "Mr. Hayes, our hero." "I'm no hero," Leonard told them. "I'm just a citizen who got arrested for being black and happened to have the resources to fight back." The real heroes are those who've been fighting this battle without recognition, without resources, without hope of victory. That evening, as the crowd dispersed, Leonard sat on his porch with Sheriff Rodriguez, who'd come to brief him on Pinewood's preparations for potential Brotherhood retaliation. "We've identified 3 cells in the county," she reported, "all under surveillance. If they move, we're ready." "Sheriff, can I ask you something? Why did you really take this job? You had to know you'd be facing this." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather was a Texas Ranger back when that meant something different for Mexican Americans. He faced discrimination his whole career, but never stopped believing in what law enforcement could be. When I saw what happened to you, I realized this was my chance to be the kind of officer he dreamed of, one who serves everyone equally." As she left, Leonard's phone rang with a blocked number. He almost didn't answer, tired of death threats, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Hayes, this is former Officer Mitchell." Leonard's hand tightened on the phone. "Mr. Mitchell, I needed to tell you something. In federal custody, I've had time to think, really think, about what I did, who I became. My cooperation with the investigation, it started as a deal for reduced time. But reading through the Brotherhood's communications, seeing it all laid out, God, we were monsters. We convinced ourselves we were patriots, but we were just thugs with badges. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know that your testimony today, it got through to some of us. Even in prison, even among the Brotherhood members here, some are starting to question to see. You didn't just expose us, Mr. Hayes. You might have saved some of us from ourselves." The line went dead before Leonard could respond. He sat in the darkness, processing this unexpected call. Redemption came in many forms, sometimes from the most unlikely sources. The next morning brought news that the full Senate vote was scheduled for the following week. The Reform Act faced fierce opposition, but momentum was building. Polls showed public support at 67%, with even many conservative voters supporting basic reforms like body cameras and accountability measures. Leonard spent the week in a blur of interviews, strategy sessions, and security briefings. The Brotherhood, wounded but not dead, was planning something for the Senate vote. Intelligence was fragmentary, but concerning talk of a final statement of martyrdom for the cause. 3 days before the vote, Jasmine arrived from Howard with her completed documentary. The family gathered to watch it, Leonard, Patricia, Marcus, and Jasmine together in the living room where federal agents had first taken Leonard's statement. The documentary was powerful, weaving Leonard's story with those of dozens of others, showing the pattern of abuse that led to this moment. But it ended not with Leonard's testimony or the arrests of Brotherhood members, but with a simple scene: Leonard in his garden, teaching neighborhood children how to plant tomatoes, black and white kids working side by side in the soil. "That's the future," Jasmine's narration concluded. "Not the garden we inherited, but the one we're planting together." "It's perfect," Patricia said, wiping away tears. "You should be proud," Leonard told his granddaughter. "You've documented history as it happened." "You made the history, Grandpa. I just recorded it." The night before the Senate vote, Leonard couldn't sleep. He walked through his house looking at the photographs on the walls, his military service, his family, his life in Pinewood. On his desk was the challenge coin Director Morris had sent beside the flag from the anonymous officers. Symbols of an America struggling to become what it had always promised to be. His secure phone rang at 3 a.m. General Thornton, his voice urgent. "Leonard, we've intercepted Brotherhood communications. They're planning to attack the Capitol during the vote. Suicide bombers, multiple vectors. We're mobilizing everything, but they might get through," Leonard finished. "Morris wants to cancel your appearance tomorrow. Says it's too dangerous." Leonard thought about all the battles he'd fought in shadows, all the threats he'd faced in service to his country. No. If I don't appear, they win. Fear wins. I'll be there. The morning of the vote dawned gray and threatening storm clouds gathering over Washington like an omen. The Capitol was in complete lockdown, more security than even after January 6th. Leonard arrived in an armored convoy underground entrance surrounded by federal agents. The Senate gallery was packed with advocates on both sides. Leonard could feel the tension, electric and dangerous. He took his seat in the front row, visible to all, a symbol of what this vote represented. Senator Morrison opened the session with a moment of silence for the 3 witnesses murdered by the Brotherhood. Then the debate began, fierce and sometimes ugly. Senators accused each other of destroying America or enabling oppression. Statistics flew like weapons. Emotions ran raw. Through it all, Leonard sat quietly, his presence a reminder of the human cost of inaction. Tom Mitchell was there too in his Marine Corps cap, tears streaming down his face as senators described his son's crimes. The vote was called at noon. One by one, senators stated their position. It was agonizingly close, 48 for 47, against with 5 still to vote. The remaining senators were swing votes, politicians who'd stayed silent, waiting to see which way the wind blew. Senator Catherine Walsh from Ohio stood. She'd been non-committal throughout the hearings. I vote yes, because Leonard Hayes served this country with honor and was arrested for existing while black. That cannot be America's story anymore. 49 to 47. 4 to go. Senator James Crawford from Montana, a conservative Republican who'd opposed every reform measure for decades, stood slowly. I've received death threats for even considering this vote. From people claiming to be patriots. Real patriots don't threaten violence to maintain their power. I vote yes. 50 to 47. The gallery erupted, but the gavel restored order. The next 2 senators voted no, making it 50 to 49, with 1 vote remaining. Senator Michael Harrison from Virginia, Leonard's own senator, who'd remained mysteriously silent throughout. Harrison stood looking directly at Leonard. I've known of Mr. Hayes for years, though we've never met. His service record, what little I'm cleared to know, is extraordinary. His treatment by law enforcement in my state is shameful. But more than that, his dignity in the face of injustice, his refusal to let hatred breed hatred, shows us the way forward. I vote yes. The Reform Act passed 51 to 49. The gallery exploded in celebration and protest simultaneously. Leonard felt Patricia's hand squeeze his shoulder. Below, senators were shaking hands or turning away from each other, the divide in America made manifest on the Senate floor. But then the lights flickered. An alarm sounded. Security agents were moving radios, crackling with urgent communication. Breach, multiple breaches, Brotherhood assets in the building. The evacuation was chaos. Leonard found himself separated from Patricia, in the crush, federal agents forming a protective diamond around him as they moved toward secure exits. But Leonard had survived too many operations to miss the signs this wasn't random. The Brotherhood hadn't come for the Senate. They'd come for him. The attack came in a stairwell. 3 men in maintenance uniforms, but their movements were military trained. The federal agents engaged, but these weren't typical extremists. These were Mitchell's special ops connections Thornton had warned about. Leonard's protective detail was good, but the attackers were better positioned. In the confusion of gunfire and smoke grenades, Leonard found himself isolated with one attacker, a man whose eyes held the cold professionalism of someone who'd killed before. You destroyed everything, the man said, raising his weapon. But Leonard Hayes hadn't survived 40 years of intelligence work by being an easy target. Age had slowed him, but training ran deep. He moved not away, but toward the threat inside the gun's arc muscle memory from countless close-quarters combat drills. The struggle was brief but vicious ending, with the attacker unconscious and Leonard holding the man's weapon. Federal agents found him standing over the subdued attacker, breathing hard but uninjured. "Sir, are you?" "I'm fine. Check on the senators. This was a distraction. There might be other targets." He was right. 2 other Brotherhood cells had tried to attack reform advocates during the evacuation chaos. All were stopped, but it had been close. Too close. The ride back to Pinewood was somber despite the legislative victory. Patricia drove in silence while Leonard watched the news coverage on his phone. The Reform Act's passage was overshadowed by the attack, with some claiming it proved why police needed more power, not less. "They'll never stop, will they?" Patricia asked finally. "Even with the law passed, the Brotherhood exposed everything we've accomplished. They'll never stop hating." "No," Leonard agreed quietly. "But neither will we stop standing against them. That's how progress works, Patricia. Not in decisive victories, but in persistent resistance to regression." At home, they found the house surrounded not by protesters but by neighbors standing guard just as they had after his arrest. The community had heard about the attack and mobilized, protecting one of their own. That evening, President Martinez called personally. "Mr. Hayes, I'll be signing the Reform Act tomorrow. I'd like you to be there." "With respect, Madam President, I've been enough of a symbol. Let the signing be about the future, not the past. Have young people there, the next generation, who'll live with these changes." "You sure?" "I'm sure. My part is done. The rest belongs to others." After the call, Leonard stood in his garden looking at the tomatoes growing strong despite the season's storms. Jasmine found him there, having driven down from Howard. "Grandpa, you know you're a hero, right? No matter what you say." "I'm a man who got arrested and had resources others don't. That's not heroism, Jasmine. That's privilege turned to purpose." "That sounds like heroism to me." They stood together in the gathering dusk, grandfather and granddaughter, representing past and future. Somewhere, Officer Mitchell sat in federal prison, possibly finding redemption. Somewhere, Brotherhood members plotted their next moves. Somewhere, young officers put on badges with a renewed understanding of what protect and serve really meant. "What now, Grandpa? The bill passed the Brotherhood's broken Mitchells in prison. What comes next?" Leonard smiled, picking a perfectly ripe tomato. "Now we tend the garden. We water what we've planted. We pull the weeds that will inevitably grow. We nurture the good and resist the bad. Day after day, season after season, until justice isn't an aspiration, but an assumption." The storm that had threatened all day finally broke, rain falling soft and steady on the garden. Leonard and Jasmine stayed outside, letting it wash over them, cleansing and renewing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, implementation of reforms, resistance from entrenched interests, the slow work of changing hearts and minds. But tonight, in a small town in Virginia, an old soldier could rest. He'd fought his last battle, and won not through force of arms, but through force of will, not through violence, but through dignity. The Thursday that had started with a simple trip to the pharmacy had become a moment of national reckoning. Leonard Hayes, Kingfisher. 7-7 Alpha. Chief Master Sergeant, retired intelligence operative and American citizen, had completed his final mission. The country he'd served in shadow and light was a step closer to its promise of justice for all. As the rain continued to fall, washing the dust from the leaves and preparing the soil for tomorrow's growth, Leonard knew that somewhere his late wife Evelyn was smiling. "About damn time," she would have said. "About damn time indeed." The reform was law, but the real victory was in the hearts that had changed the minds that had opened the children who would grow up in a slightly more just world. That was Leonard's true legacy, not the operations that would remain classified forever, but this very public stand for dignity, equality, and justice. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with messages, congratulations, thanks, continued threats from Brotherhood remnants. Leonard ignored them all. Tonight was for family, for community, for the quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled. Tomorrow, the work would continue. Tomorrow, there would be new battles to fight. But tonight, Leonard Hayes was at peace, knowing he'd answered his country's call one last time, not with weapons or intelligence, but with the simple revolutionary act of demanding to be treated as fully human. The rain stopped, stars appearing between breaking clouds. Somewhere in Pinewood, children slept safely, their dreams unburdened by the prejudices that had poisoned previous generations. That more than any legislation or conviction was victory. Leonard went inside, took his evening medication, those pills that had started everything, and prepared for bed. His work was done, but the movement would continue. The seeds were planted. The garden would grow. And America slowly, painfully, but inevitably, would continue becoming what it had always promised to be.